How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Is this
Good.
thing on?
Trying to figure out what they're sending me a message. They moved me from way down that end to way down this end.
I know. I think
Mine works.
Yeah.
I was next to you down
Yeah.
that.
Maybe they're doing
I always
it.
have to look because I'm kind of like, where am I this week?
Well, at least now they got the names on the back.
Oh, they do.
Yeah.
Oh,
You
yay.
used to have to kind of run around the front and look at. But that.
It's embarrassing if you're late for a meeting.
Yeah. All right. That's okay.
Yeah, that's not a bad thing.
Obviously, question about happened and stuff like that. To me, that's how it's
Isn't usually the screen comes on there? Is that not on? Is that the voting? Yeah. Well, yeah. That's the one that you recognize.
Yeah, one.
Flashing.
Well, one of them resigned.
It has another name on it too.
That's what my fellow.
Yeah.
Supposed to pass it to her.
All right. I think that's what you normally have, right? Yeah. Okay. Good. Thanks.
They did. Oh, well, I thought you might have requested it.
Yeah.
Goose.
Yeah. And yeah. Yeah, and that's absolutely correct. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there are always going to be things that need to be done. You just, you'll have to do it. Probably, and you'll fix it. You have to do it.
Well, I was until I heard you were going to try to get some salary money.
12 months or 18 years ago. That's right. Ask, yes, they should be approached, not.
Dustin is jumping off the building. He's trying to get me to jump with him. Is he crazy? Uh-oh. See, there's no way in the world I'm gonna do that. I don't know. He sent me and asked me to help him donate some money, then he asked me to jump with
Yeah,
him.
that didn't come out.
And I love that guy. There's no way I'm jumping off a building.
All right, you all set?
Got caught in that traffic.
Right.
What?
You got caught in traffic.
I started down 102nd, and then I had to come over and go along
Hey,
and get through. Make sure
I wouldn't be able to make it, but I wish I could.
And then
He tried to get me. I was like, come on, you're a coward. I want you to go too. There's no way in the world I'm jumping.
illegally parked and I handed me the box.
Can everyone take their seats, please? Call the meeting to order. Welcome everyone to the TBARTA Board meeting. Cliff, can you lead us in the pledge?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Call the roll, please. Present.
Present.
Commissioner Janet Long,
Present.
Commissioner Bob Martin, Commissioner Pat Camp did send us an email that she would not be attending this morning. Commissioner Reggie Bellamy,
Present.
Commissioner Catherine Starkey is also out and she will not be attending today. Commissioner Karen Seal,
Present.
Rich McLean,
Present.
Mayor Rick Kreisman will not be attending. Mayor Jane Castor, are you available on the phone? She did say she would possibly be joining.
Okay.
Secretary David Wynn,
Here?
Secretary Nandale,
Here.
you have a quorum.
Thank you. First order of business is public comment, and the chair recognizes Tom Nocera.
Good morning, members of the board. On February 5th, Skytrain's new president, Jay Copeland, and his new compliance officer, Marco Booth, spent the day with us in Clearwater and briefed us, and we briefed them on our progress that we're making towards a pilot project that we're doing in Clearwater and Clearwater Beach. Skytrain let us know that they remain interested in relocating their world headquarters to the Tampa Bay area. They're entertaining what they describe as term sheets from other locations require a sizable amount of land to be able to have a test track, and there's not too many parcels large enough that remain in the Tampa Bay area. There are a few, but there are not many. Also, I want to report that the city of Clearwater passed a resolution that is encouraging Beach Train Clearwater and SkyTrain to continue to work together towards a pilot project. And I want to thank you very much for your time, and everyone can hear me. I could hear myself just fine. Did anyone not get the gist of what I was reporting on? Thank you.
Thank you, Tom, and you have such a great voice, we could hear you anyway. Anyone else wishing to make public comment? None being heard, I will consider public comment closed. Next order of business is the consent agenda item, which the only item is the prior board meetings. Are there any corrections? None being heard, I'll accept a motion to approve.
Second.
Been a motion, second. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Meeting's approved. Information items, there are none other than immediately following this board meeting, we will have a steering committee for the Transportation Summit. So anyone wishing to stay after that, please, you're welcome to do so. Next item of business is discussion items. The chair recognizes Rich McLean for the Policy Committee report and Employee Policy Manual.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. As you know, we just held our Policy Committee meeting where we reviewed the updated and vastly expanded Employee Policy Manual. I want to commend David and his staff. They've done a fantastic job in updating our current manual, revising it drastically, if I may say so, and very nicely. Right now, I'd like to ask David if he wants to make comments about that before we move this for an approval.
I'll just, I guess, summarize why we decided to update the manual. The manual that currently exists was approved by TBARTA's board back in March of 2009, so it is a bit dated. Last year during 2019, we brought a few policies to the board for approval, and the policy committee, during the course of reviewing those policies, requested that staff take a wholesale look at the policy manual and bring recommended changes to the policy committee at once instead of bringing them to the committee piecemeal. So that's what we did. The approach that we took was to obviously provide more comprehensive guidance to employees, but at the same time also continuing to position TBARTA as an employer of choice. As you stated, we did make some pretty significant changes to the manual. We reorganized it and expanded it a bit, but the policies that you have before you today were in fact reviewed by council to ensure that they comply with state and federal requirements, and they do.
Thank you, David. As I mentioned, Chair, we did have this discussion in the committee meeting. This updated policy was very well received, and we moved this to the board as approved with, of course, a board's actions afterwards. So.
Okay, given the discussion on the 501c3 and the VTO, could you or David briefly relate that discussion for the benefit of the, I think most of the board members were there, but just for the benefit of the public as well?
Yeah, so there is a recommended policy relating to volunteer time off, which would allow employees to take up to 4 hours per quarter to volunteer with a 501c3 nonprofit or other nonprofit organization. And during the policy committee meeting, the other nonprofit classification created some discussion, so it was suggested that we remove that clause and leave it as reading just a 501c3 nonprofit organization.
Are there any questions about that or comments?
Thanks, Chair. For those who are following, that was Section 5.7. And it's in the first paragraph after there where it talks about the amount of time, if you were following.
Any further questions? Rich, would you like to make a motion then to approve that?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. I motion to approve with modifications to the language for the 501c3.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's been a motion, a second. Is there any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Public comment.
Aye.
Public comment.
Oh. Is there public comment on this? Okay, thank you. Thank you, council. None being heard, we have a motion, a second. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes carry. Thank you. Rich, is there any further business for the policy committee?
None at this time. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that report. Chair now recognizes Janet Long for the Finance Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We did have a very nice, positive financial meeting upstairs, and I'm so happy to report we have money in the bank. Our committee reviewed the update on the line of credit with Pilot Bank. Currently, the documentation has been reviewed by our council, and the revisions have been recommended to the bank. So now we are in the process of waiting to hear back from them, so stay tuned. Hopefully, we'll bring this back to you for an action item at our next meeting. Excuse me. Melanie is going to be giving you an update on the financials, and I'm pleased to report that she has been very, very busy sending FDOT lots of requests for reimbursement. And TBARTA is actually awaiting the funds so that we can reimburse our bank account and pay our vendors, including Enterprise, Tyndale Oliver, and WSP, who have been working very hard for us. Unfortunately, without these funds, the vendors cannot be paid. And so I'm particularly interested in making sure that we get all caught up with them. Debbie has reported that FDOT is working to push these through for us, and I'm very happy to hear that, because on March 3rd at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm going to be meeting with the CFO, Mr. Jimmy Petronis, who I did serve with in the Florida House. And I'm very anxious to give him a positive update, because I think all of us that have been working with FDOT and with the folks here locally who have worked so hard to help us understand and dot the i's and cross the t's with the process to get the reimbursements from Tallahassee. And I want the CFO to know how hard we've all been working and how pleased we are at the relationships. We had 4 action items that were reviewed and approved by the committee this morning that we're going to present here. So Melanie, would you like to come up, please, and give the financials for the month of January?
Hello, Melanie Williams, Senior Accountant here at TBARTA. So I'm going to go over the January financial numbers. So at the end of January 31st, we had a net surplus of $480,638,000. Now this is $23,305,000 above our actual budget of $457,333. So looking at the revenues, we were $1.4 million under budget, and that is primarily due to the state funding due to the timing of the PD&E and technology project. On the flip side, on the expenses, we were under budget also by 1.4. And in your packet, you have a breakdown, and it contains like the salary, we were under budget for $102,000. The professional services, PD&E, due to the timing, it's 1.2. Advertising, $79,000, and computer assistant programs, $92,000. So including your packet is the balance sheet. Moving on. Our accounts receivable at the end of January 31st was approximately $1.6 million, offsetting with the liability of accounts payable, $660,000. And at the end of the month, we had $33,000 in the bank. And that pretty much wraps up the summary financials for January.
Any questions? Okay, none being heard, thank you for that report, excellent report.
Thank you.
Why don't we
Thank-
bring Brian up now to
Well,
to
I
go
was
through the
just
free?
getting ready to do that.
Well, as a chair, I've got to recognize him. And
Oh,
you
I
ask-
thought I was the chair of finance, but.
We are, but, okay. Chair recognizes Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian Passaro, TBARTA staff. So we have an action item for seeking approval of the board of a memorandum of understanding with PSTA. PSTA and FDOT are doing a bustle and shoulder demonstration on I-275, roughly between 22nd Avenue North and 62nd Avenue North. As part of that demo, FDOT is going to be installing ramp meters at 38th Avenue and 54th Avenue that will stop the flow of traffic onto the interstate until the PSTA bus passes by. They have agreed to install technology in the cabinet that will communicate with the buses. They have asked PSTA to pay for the onboard technology. PSTA plans to equip about up to 6 buses. The technology costs about $4,000 to $5,000 each. PSTA approached TBARTA and asked if we would like to collaborate on this project, and we just see this as a great opportunity for collaboration. It's the same corridor as the regional rapid transit. The regional rapid transit buses could potentially use this same technology. We have the money to do it. It would come out of our 5307 grant. So what we are seeking approval on is approval of the memorandum of understanding with PSTA for up to $30,000. PSTA would do the procurement and the installment. It would be their equipment, where basically our contribution is the up to $30,000 for the project. And with that, I'll answer any questions you have.
Any questions for Brian? Okay, none being heard, I'll accept a motion.
Move approval. Second.
The motion, a second. Council, do we need public comment on this since there's a vote?
Yes.
Is there anyone from the public wishing to make comment on this vote? Okay, none being heard, is there any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you, Brian, and you're continued to be recognized for the next item.
Next item is also an action item. This is the TBARTA USF Master Agreement. Florida statutes governs the public procurement of commodities and contractual services, specifically 287.057. A part of that statute, specifically subparagraph E12, exempts services and commodities provided by government entities from competitive bid requirements. The issue is our own procurement manual does not allow for that exception. We would like to call upon the transportation research expertise of the Center for Urban Transportation Research at USF. We have consulted with our general counsel on this. It is his opinion that the board has the authority to waive the competitive bid requirement of our procurement manual for the purpose of a master agreement with USF. I should point out that PSTA has an almost exact identical master agreement with USF. We pretty much just swapped out the word PSTA for TBARTA in this agreement. It's been reviewed by our general counsel. It's been reviewed by USF's general counsel. It's ready to go. It's a 2-year agreement. In the agreement, it states specifically that USF is not guaranteed any certain compensation or work under this agreement. Any task order that we issue from this agreement would still be subject to our procurement manual guidelines. So what that means is anything that's $50,000 or more, we would have to come to the board for approval. If it's less than $50,000, that would be the executive director's approval. So what we are seeking in this item is we're asking the board to waive the competitive bid requirement in the procurement manual as it pertains to USF and authorize the executive director to sign the master agreement with USF.
Any questions for Brian on this? Brian, just a couple questions I have. You, of course, would bill this typically on hours and time and have a very detailed itemization of the hours spent on a task, I assume.
Right. Any task order that we issue under this, if we have a piece of work that we would like Cutter to do for us, they would give us a scope of work and budget, and they would give us the hours that they think it's going to take to do the project. But then when we execute the task work order, it would be done as a lump sum agreement, which means that they don't get paid a dime until they give us a deliverable that we are satisfied with.
Okay, my other question is, Secretary Gwynn, I assume this is in conjunction, in basically compliance with the way DOT interacts with Cutter as well when they have a specific task for them to do?
I'm pretty sure that it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't looked at the details, but it sounds pretty similar.
Yeah, I had served on the board of Cutter, and our relationship with DOT Central Office was the same thing. So this is very much in compliance and in continuity with the rest of the states and their contracts with Cutter.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Thank you. Just for those that are listening, a lot of the discussion upstairs with these same board members took place around this, and so this is not something we're just jumping in without a lot of conversation. I wanted to make it clear and make a point that this is a 2-year waiver agreement with USF and Cutter, and that any of the specific projects that come before us, we could still go out to bid if we desire to, but this is an internal mechanism because of the limitations within our policy. We're now clearing USF and Cutter with this non-competitive bid agreement for 2 years. So that's what's happening with this.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, none being heard, I will accept a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
A motion, a second. Council, any public comment on this motion? None being heard. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
I think we have Mayor Castor on the line.
Oh,
Were you for this, Mayor Castor?
Yes, I said, sorry.
welcome, Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so the motion carries by unanimous consent. Next item is the Public Transportation Safety Plan.
Okay. This is an information item. In July of 2018, the Federal Transit Administration issued its final rule for what is called a Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan. This is a new requirement that FTA has come out with. And I need to point out there's a typo in the staff report on this. It says that the compliance deadline for having this plan is July 20th, 2019. That should say 2020. We would like to have Cutter help us develop this safety plan. They have developed a scope of work and budget in the amount of $44,119.13 to do the work. This work would be funded out of our state operating grant. The reason why we're seeking out the assistance of Cutter on this particular piece of work, I should explain that Cutter is organized into different research groups. One of those groups is the Transit Safety and Workforce Development Program. Most of the staff that are on that team are former transit employees. So, for example, the Cutter project manager for this study is a gentleman by the name of Mr. Paul Goyette. He used to be the deputy director of Lee-Tran down in Lee County. He has over 28 years of experience in public transit. The other person that would be working on this project, her name is Ms. Jody Godfrey. She is the secretary of the APTA Bus Safety Committee, as well as an active member of the Transportation Research Board Task Force on Transit Safety and Security. So I am personally relieved that we have this resource in our own backyard that we can call upon to help us complete this plan and meet the deadline. I've listened in on numerous FTA webinars on this topic, and I can tell you that transit agencies across the country right now are struggling to figure out how they're going to comply with this new planning document that FTA wants done. So I am very thankful that we have the services of Cutter that we can call upon for this. And like I said, this is an information item.
Any other questions for Brian? Thank you for that report. The chair now recognizes Cindy Raskin for her report on the commuter van pool contract amendment.
Good morning, Cindy Raskin, Director of Commuter Services. We have a contract with Enterprise to operate our commuter services van pool program. They took over that contract when they purchased V-Ride back in 2017. At that time, they had 96 vans in service. By the end of that fiscal year, 2017, they had already gotten it up to 103 vans in service. In June of 2018, we executed a new agreement with Enterprise, a 2-year plus 3 optional 1-year extensions. By the end of 2018, they were up to 129 vans. And at the end of 2019, just this past September, they were up to 150 vans. As of the end of January of this year, we're up to 170 vans. We're very happy with their performance. The Contract amendment that's before you does two things. It clarifies some language about reporting, such as requiring that the van pool recipients report their ridership in order to qualify for the $400 monthly subsidy. It has some dates in there about when enterprise needs to submit certain reports to us, and it clarifies which court system would be responsible for any issues that arise. The second part of the amendment exercises the first renewal option. So the ask before you today is to please approve the contract amendment with Enterprise as stated before you.
Thank you, Cindy. Any questions for Cindy before we get into that action item? One, I'd just like to make a comment. You guys have done such an excellent job, and I commend you on doing that. I did want to reflect there was some discussion in the committee meeting about expanding the van pool to Manatee County and hopefully some of the other participant counties in TBARTA. I think that is an excellent idea, and as I understand it, both district secretaries from District 1 and 7 have been in discussions about potentially an interagency agreement for extending the van pool across county lines and in different districts. I hope that will continue, and we want to see this very successful program very expanded in the Tampa Bay region and hopefully in the state. Thank you very much for that report. That being said, since there are no other questions, I'll accept a motion to approve the amendment. Second. Been a motion, a second. Any public comment on this? None being heard. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. 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 Mayor? Thank you, Mayor. Any opposed? The ayes have it.
Thank you very much.
Informational. Okay, any, Commissioner Long, any further report from the Finance Committee?
I think you've handled it very well, Chair.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. None being heard, the next item is the Legislative Subcommittee report. Chair recognizes Cliff Emanuel.
Thank you, Chair. We had no action items today in the Legislative Committee, but we did have an excellent report from Ron Pierce. I'd like to recognize him, Mr. Chair, if you would, to give us a brief report that he gave us at the committee meeting this morning.
Chair welcomes Ron Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Board members, just a quick update. I know you've all heard it. We'll do it for the audience. We are in day 39, week 6 of session. We have 3 weeks left. First of all, on our legislative agenda, we were requesting $1.5 million in operation dollars again. That is currently in the House budget at $1.5 million in non-recurring trust fund dollars coming out of the DOT trust fund. It is not in the Senate budget, but we're very well positioned going to conference, and we feel very good about that item as we head into conference. Conference should probably start probably sometime the beginning of week 8, my guess would be. The other issue that we're working on your behalf in Tallahassee is our piece of legislation. At our last board meeting, we talked about having the ability to be able to vote by electronic means. That is currently, all that has been removed from the bill. As we talked about, it kind of opens Pandora's box with regards to allowing other regional and smaller organizations to be able to vote by electronic means. But what is in the bill is a couple of things. Number one, it would allow the mayors on the board to appoint an alternate. So if they're not able to attend, the mayor could appoint an alternate to be here. The legislation goes a little bit further to make sure that the alternate is obviously a voting member of that respective city council. And in addition, that person would have to be voted on by the city council to be the alternate to be able to have voting rights on this board. The second thing that it does is it clears up the interpretation of what a quorum is. Currently in our Enabling Act, there's a little bit of, there's a line in there that is being interpreted a couple different ways. So it ensures that, number one, a quorum of the board is 50% plus one of the voting membership of this board. So that's included. It also takes the chair's coordinating council and takes it out from being a committee under TBARTA and puts it back over under the MPO, which has been something that this board and the CCC both agree upon. And the last thing that it does is at the very end of the Enabling Act, it lists what all the committees are of this board. Committee staff and also our bill sponsors thought that was being a little bit too prescriptive, and that we're going to actually remove that section and make, that way, if you want to make changes to what your committees are moving forward, you have the ability to do that without having to go to Tallahassee every year and changing the Enabling Act. So I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions for Ron? Ron, one question I had, if you could elaborate a little more on the mechanism of our funding that we discussed in the committee meeting, namely that going forward, we would prefer to have discussions with DOT about making this a baseline funding request within the district rather than have it as a, an item that the legislature just appropriates and then throws it on the district to have to find the money, potentially taking from other projects. So if you could amplify that.
Sure, yeah, Mr. Chairman, and I did have a brief conversation with Secretary Gwen after the meeting as well. I think the point we were trying to make is we can't continue to go to Tallahassee every year looking for an earmark, basically, a line item within the budget. So at some point in time, we need to look at more of a dedicated funding source, and what would that look like? One option is trying to work with DOT on including as a part of the base, including as a part of a project, something where we're not having to go back every year and looking for a dedicated funding source through a line item to be able to do that. So I think there's some creative ways we can do that. Again, this is not for this year. This would be after session. So my guess would be is let's get through the next 21 days, come back, have a conversation. I think the first conversation needs to be with Secretary Gwen about what can we do to work with him and his office to figure out a way to make it easier on all of us to look at trying to get some type of a recurring revenue source from DOT in such a way that it becomes recurring in nature and it prevents us from having to go to Tallahassee every year looking for dollars to be a part of our operating budget.
Yeah, thanks for those comments. Either secretary, would you either like to comment on that being the appropriate mechanism? Secretary Gwen.
I'd say, and LK can join if he wants. This is something certainly we need to talk to our central office leadership on. You're correct, as it is now, earmarks are typically covered by the district from which the earmark resides. And so I'd have to find money within the District 7 earmark for the most part to cover it. But yeah, I think it's something we could talk internally with our staff and talk before a legislative fix would try to be developed.
Any further comment?
I would agree with Secretary Gwen's assessment. We have to go back and talk to our central office leadership about this. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, thanks. And I would concur, and then I'm going to recognize Commissioner Long. Typically, when an appropriation like that is made, I think legislatures go back and tell people in their district, oh, we got this money for TBARTA or whatever. What they don't tell you is that the district then has to find the money from their 5-year plan, which is somewhat unfortunate and puts DOT in an awkward position. So I think overall this is a win-win for everyone to do things this way as a way of programmatically including our appropriations in a 5-year plan for purposes of regularity and planning ahead rather than haphazardly every year going up and making a legislative ask. That said, Commissioner Long, do you have some comments on that?
Yes, my comments are mostly for our 2 district secretaries primarily because I'm sure you're aware of the ongoing, I hate to use the word attacks, but that's the only one I can think of that's appropriate, that us in local government are constantly under from the legislature in terms of them trying to tie our hands. And one of my biggest concerns is that in trying to look for recurring dollars out of your budget, Mr. Secretary, District 7, and out of your budget as well, is that we try to look at an amount that's about $2 million instead of this 1.5 that we keep asking for, because the difference is going to be made up, if that's not possible, by those of us that sit on this board that are local elected officials in terms of upping our contribution to TBARTA. While I know that because of different matching dollars, et cetera, our contributions over the years will probably go up anyway, I think we have a responsibility as board members, not only on this board, but on our own elected boards to try to make sure that we're covering that in the most appropriate way. So, thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely concur with that.
Mr. Chairman, I'd be remiss also, we need to thank our bill sponsors. Representative Diamond's done a great job on sponsoring a bill in the House. Cleared its last committee yesterday. It should be up in the House probably next week or in week 8. And Senator Roussan in the Senate we'll have our final committee meeting for that bill next week. And it should also be up in the Senate probably week 8 or week 9. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Any further questions for Ron? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cliff, anything further?
No, that concludes, the legislative committee report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. That being concluded, the chair now recognizes Bill Johnson for the Citizens Advisory Committee report. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Board members, the Citizens Advisory Committee met on February 12th here at the PSTA office. We did have a quorum. The principal action was a review by Mr. Ball of the Regional Transit Development Plan, and specifically the proposed Regional Transit Vision Network. The committee voted to recommend your adoption of the proposed Regional Transit Vision Network, but with a slight modification to give more recognition to the Regional Transportation Disadvantage Network that we're thinking about expanding, and to highlight the importance of the TBARTA van pool program. We also recommended giving more attention to the importance of the grassroots support as an integral part of the plan. The motion to recommend adoption passed with these additions. We also received an update on the Flamingo card rollout, Flamingo Fare card rollout, and an update on the Regional Rapid Transit Project. I'm sharing a worksheet detailing the CAC appointments and membership attendance. It's a copy in front of you. And by operation of our bylaws attendance policy, we have several vacant seats. The bylaws state that a member with 3 unexcused absences per year will be considered to have vacated their seat. And that is our report, Mr. Chairman, members.
Thank you, Bill. Any questions for Bill? Thank you so much for that report. Next item is the Transit Management Committee report. There was no meeting, so there's no report. Next item is the chair's report, and I'll be brief. I mostly want to thank the committee chairs for their diligent work in moving everything forward. We're in good financial shape thanks to Commissioner Long and her finance committee and team. We're moving everything forward in the legislature. Thank you guys for that great work. And policy, Rich, thanks for all your leadership in advancing our new items there. I'll now recognize David for the Executive Director's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of quick items. I know I've reported over the past several months about an agenda management system called Granicus that we were going to roll out for the board. Granicus has experienced some difficulties with the new platform. They have some bugs inside their system which they can't seem to resolve, and they don't know exactly when they might be able to fix them. We asked if it was possible to get their old platform, which others are probably using, and we've received good feedback about it, but they are not providing it to new clients anymore. So we had to shift gears a little bit, and we went out to find other vendors that provide agenda management systems. We have in fact found one called Municode, and we're currently going through the procurement process in order to acquire it. From our research, it appears as if Municode provides better functionality, is cloud-based, and is actually $6,000 a year less expensive than Granicus is. We have no timeline yet for when we're going to roll that out to the board, but I'll provide more information to you all as we proceed through the procurement process. The only other item I wanted to mention is that we are having some design charrettes for the regional rapid transit stations. We sent out invitations earlier this week about a series of the charrettes that will be conducted throughout the first half of March. There will be a total of 8 that'll be scheduled in areas around where those 8 stations are proposed. 6 of them are scheduled, and 2 are still yet to be confirmed. But we hope that you receive that invitation and that you'll be able to join us if your schedules allow. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, David. Why don't you go ahead and discuss any future meeting subjects now before we get into the presentation?
No new meeting subjects than were on previous agendas. We have the one that's still pending for intermodal centers that had been requested previously by the board. There's one on cable-propelled transit, which we would like to do. We wanted to get a presentation to you first on the feasibility study that's currently being conducted related to the innovative transit technologies. As you're aware, aerial gondolas is one of the modes that's being studied, so we wanted to give you an update on that first, which we have planned for you today. We also have presentations that are planned for the express bus service that was asked about at the forum in November for service from St. Pete to West Shore, and also a presentation for the board on the Flamingo Regional Fare Card Program.
Thank you, David. Any questions for David? Okay, none being heard. Thank you for that report. We'll now turn to our presentations, and I'd like to recognize all the folks that are coming up to present on MCORS.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
If I may, let me give you a brief introduction before my team comes up and presents on the MCORS program. The last meeting, this board requested for the department to come and give an overview of the MCORS program. So we got Walter Bergeman, who's with the department. He's our PD&E project manager, part of the MCORS program, and Bill Jones with our owner's representative consultant, HNTB. They're here to go over the MCORS program, which is called the Multi-Use Corridors of Regional Economic Significance. What I want to mention is this presentation is mainly focused on the intent of the program as it relates to charge given by the statute, and what the department is doing to actually implement the charge given to us by the statute. One of the things you may find is later part of the presentation may focus on one corridor, because that's the corridor our district is handling, but the approach is very similar for all the 3 corridors identified in the program. Okay, so with that.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Recognized.
All right. As Secretary Nandum mentioned, my name is Walter Brueggemann. I'm with District 1, specifically working on the Southwest Central Corridor. This is Bill Jones. So we all know Florida is the 2nd fastest growing state in the U.S. So the map here you see shows the red illustrates the projected, what is projected to be developed by the year 2070. So to help manage that growth, the MCORS program, the objective of it is to provide multiple modes of transportation as well as multiple types of infrastructure. So the purpose of the project is to, provide regional connectivity, to encourage job growth, revitalize some of our rural communities, all while protecting the environment. So here's some of the benefits of the program. We're looking to mitigate traffic congestion while also providing for better means of hurricane evacuations, improve connectivity for utility infrastructure, water, sewer, energy distribution, broadband, as well as looking for ways to use new technologies, ways to implement things for autonomous and connected vehicles, and so on. So Senate Bill 7068 specified 3 separate corridors. So we have the Suncoast Corridor extends from Citrus County to Jefferson County. The Northern Turnpike Connector extends from the existing turnpike to the proposed Suncoast toll facility. And then our corridor, Southwest Central Connector, that District 1 is working on. Here's a blow-up showing the 9 counties that District 1 for the Southwest Central Connector that we're working on out of District 1. This corridor extends from Collier County to Polk County. This is our MCORS team. The personnel shown in green represents the staff out of central office that's working on the project. The pink shows the various districts. In the very center, you see our main team members for the Southwest Central Connector, LK being our chair of the task force. Tracy Hood out of District 7 is the co-chair, and Marlon Becerra, also in District 1, is the production lead for this corridor. So with the Senate bill, it specified a task force to be set up to provide guiding principles to DOT and ultimately evaluate the corridor. So our task force for the Southwest Central Connector is made up of 47 members representing various agencies, multiple state agencies such as Department of Health, Department of Education, FDOT, Fish and Wildlife Commission, water management districts, both water management districts that are in District 1, as well as multiple county governments are represented. We have multiple county commissioners, as well as regional planning council and metropolitan planning organizations are also represented. And then we, lastly, well, I shouldn't say last, we also have many environmental agencies represented on the task force, such as Audubon, Defenders of Wildlife, Thousand Friends of Florida, and multiple other environmental agencies. So the purpose of the task force is to ultimately evaluate and explore potential opportunities and needs of the corridor and ultimately provide guiding principles to DOT. So they'll be looking for ways to, items we need to avoid and minimize and recommending guiding principles on things that we need, possible enhancements that we need to explore. They're charged with providing a report to the governor's office as well as the Senate and the House by October 1st of this year. So with this, we're engaging with the public in multiple ways. Public has multiple opportunities to engage with us, such as at the end of every task force meeting, there's a public comment period where the public has a chance to get up and speak. We've also had multiple community open houses. We've had 4 community open houses specifically with our Southwest Central corridor in various communities to give the public a chance to come out and speak one-on-one with FDOT staff and really learn about the project to help understand the project. We've also got a website, floridamcors.com, where you can go and learn about the project, see an interactive map, look at the various environmental layers that are associated within our corridor. It's also the website also shows an email address. If you'd like to send in comments, you can, it gives you the email address there, but the email address is fdot.listens@dot.state.fl.us. So you can send all of your comments in via email. We've also got various other media and newsletters where we're reaching out to the public, as well as briefings to local agencies such as yourself. So we're looking to build off of the existing visions and plans that we already have, such as the local comprehensive plans, long-range transportation plans, conservation and resource management plans. So we're looking to build off of what we already have and go from there. So what's different about MCORS? So with MCORS, it's not just about reacting to growth and moving vehicles. It's also about moving people and freight and looking at multiple modes of infrastructure or multiple modes of transportation and different types of infrastructure, looking to enhance the communities, all while making sure we're protecting the environment. So at FDOT, protecting the environment is very important to us. So we'll be looking at evaluating wildlife crossing design features and the needs for those wildlife crossings. We'll also be looking for opportunities to protect various wildlife corridors, critical areas where some wildlife corridors may need to be connected. Also, the task force may recommend to combine right-of-way acquisition with the acquisition of lands or easements to help facilitate some of these environmental enhancements. Also with this, we've got starting a workforce development program where we're looking to help provide employment opportunities to low-income areas, to help provide training, to link those folks up with our construction personnel to help provide for a labor shortage. Here's a schedule for the MCORS program. So the task force members were appointed in August of last year. The final report, the task force is charged with providing their final report to the governor as well as the Senate and the House by October of this year. If feasible, we are looking to start construction by December of '22, and we are to provide the applicable local governments that are within the study area the task force report by December of '23. And then the Senate bill calls for construction to be substantially completed by December of 2030. So here's the process. We're in the planning stage right now. We'll be looking to start the PD&E phase later this year. After the PD&E, we'll get into design, and as I mentioned, construction is slated to begin December of '22. And this shows the various fundings that are allocated as per the Senate bill to the MCORS program, as well as the workforce development program, as well as the local municipality funding for to assist the locals with their facilities. And with that, I'll open it up to questions.
Questions? One, just to kind of kick this off, I think this is so vitally important to hurricane evacuation and to resiliency in the state, which Commissioner Long has been one of our leading world experts on in Florida and throughout the country and internationally. And I just think this is absolutely essential. And one question I had, and I think all of us on our minds, that we're going to have to start elevating roadways throughout the state to account for sea rise and so forth. And I hope your long-term plan for MCORS anticipates that in terms of grade elevation for.
We'll be evaluating the need.
From the structures. Questions? Anything else?
Just please send us a presentation.
What's that?
They're on you can get them. It's in the packet. Go to the agenda that Jennifer, online, you have to pull up your iPad.
Commissioner Long.
Yes, thank you. So, this is really needed and obviously critical, especially throughout our region. It's disturbing to me, though, to see that this construction deadline doesn't finish until 2030, because given the growth that's going on down, especially in your area, I mean, I just can't even imagine what that's going to look like once it's under construction.
It's a big corridor. It's gonna.
Well, it's a big corridor, but Jesu Pisu, when you don't even get started for another 3 years.
Secretary.
All right. So, Commissioner Long, typically our project schedules are a lot longer than that because the project development study and the planning phase are long time frames, particularly this size of a project. We are, based on the charge given by the legislature and, that's identified in the statute, we're actually overlapping a lot of phases to meet this aggressive timeline. Having said that, part of the exercise is going to be, you have 140 miles in our corridor, 150 miles in the Suncoast corridor, and then the Turnpike extension. We're going to, as we finish our planning process and the task force guiding principles, we're going to be identifying what those priorities are going to be, because you got to define, you can't construct all 140 miles at the same time, right? So we're going to identify what those start and finish points are going to be and the different corridor segments are going to be, and then figuring out the priority order so that we can start construction segment by segment with the goal to substantially complete within the deadline. So you will be seeing a lot of activity as it relates to construction, but not all at the same time.
Can I respond to that, Mr. Chair?
Please do.
Thank you. And while I clearly understand how long this takes, this is one of my biggest beefs, and I hope that you'll carry my message forward. Because when I hate to keep referring to when I was, but when I did serve in the Florida legislature, I was on Transportation, Economic Development, and Community Affairs Committee. And I remember then talking about, you know, technology is going to be as transformational for transportation as the, you know, automobile was taking us from the horse and buggy. But the way in which we fund transportation, I don't think it's changed in 50 years, has it? And if we don't start thinking in a bigger, bolder way about how to get some of this stuff done, we're just going to get further and further and further and further behind. I know I'm preaching to the choir, because this is way outside of my wheelhouse. I'm not a planner. I know that design takes a long time. But if you think about the partnerships you have to build along the way between, you know, your local agencies, your state government, your federal government, oh my goodness, it's like the Stone Ages. Okay, I'll stop now, but thank you for letting me vent.
I think we
once
concur.
again.
Any further questions or comments? Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Chair now recognizes Brian Pizarro for his presentation on innovative transit technology.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Since the beginning of November, TBARTA has been conducting a high-level feasibility study of Hyperloop, aerial gondolas, and air taxis. WSP, our general services consultant, has been doing the work on this study, and today you're going to get a presentation on what we've learned so far. We plan to come back to the board in May with another update. In June, we'll receive the draft report, and we'll present that to you in July. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Ms. Christina Kopp from WSP, who is the senior planner for the study.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Pleasure to be here. This is hopefully an exciting presentation this morning. The goal of the presentation is to provide you an objective overview of the three technologies that Brian was talking about, understand what the potential is for those technologies, what some of the issues or considerations are for those technologies, and then where they are in the development process. They're not all at on the same plane. So just a little bit of housekeeping. As Brian mentioned, we are looking at the aerial gondolas. You'll see it referred to as the cable-propelled transit. That's the umbrella they fit under. The air taxis, we're looking within the 5 counties for that part of the study, and we're also looking at Hyperloop and how that could potentially connect through the state of Florida as well. When I mentioned that they're not all in the same place when it comes to the development process, aerial gondolas exist. They operate successfully throughout the world, so we're going to talk about those first, and then we're going to dive into the air taxis, which are in the urban air mobility umbrella, and Hyperloop, and where they stand today. As I won't spend time on the schedule, Brian pretty much gave that a good overview of that for you right before starting. We've been doing a lot of research. As part of that research, we've been talking to a lot of the industry experts. That includes the manufacturers, the developers, other agencies that have been conducting their own feasibility analyses, and some of the folks that are actually working from the regulatory side as well. So cable-propelled transit, it's not new. It's certainly innovative in its application in the urban areas, but it is not new. It's been around since the 1600s, actually. We see it here in the U.S., mostly in tourist applications or certainly in ski resorts. But that's not the only place where they exist. The benefits of aerial gondolas are that they can actually traverse areas where there's geographic boundaries. So over water, you see them a lot where there's mountains that cause, it makes it more challenging for folks to actually get from point A to point B. You can actually travel over a lot of congested areas too, which makes it a huge benefit. The safety and accessibility are also part of those benefits. In Switzerland, they've looked at comparing the technologies between gondolas and the rest of their transit network, and it's actually come to be one of the safer options over there. And they can actually be accessible as well. Some of the considerations when looking at gondolas would be weather. That's actually a huge factor here in Florida, as we all know. You're going to have to be able to withstand the wind, rain, and of course lightning. And then potential shutdowns of the actual system if it's for commuter-based. Privacy is another concern. You'll see that pop up again with the air taxis. Anything that's in the air, you're going to have public perception issues or questions when it comes to privacy, because you have not in my backyard, you have residents, businesses, private properties come into play. View sheds, kind of along the same lines. I may not want it, blocking my beautiful beach view. So those are just things to consider when moving forward. The technology, I mentioned it's been around since the 1600s. That's because it's actually pretty simple. You have cables of various sizes that are supported along cables with a grip, and there's towers holding the cables. And that's it sounds very overly simplistic, because it is. You have various different cabin sizes for passengers. You also have infrastructure. It's stations, so just like other transit networks, you have to have stations. The difference is you have a drive station, which includes the electric motor for the propulsion of the cable. You have the return station, which is just turning those cabins back around to the drive station. And then depending on the size of the system, you also have intermediate stations so that passengers can board and alight based on their destinations. And you have angle stations so that the system can actually make turns. The amenities. Amenities are very similar to typical transit systems, and they can actually vary in cost. A lot of them, the Wi-Fi, lighting, not glass floors, right? We don't see those on buses, but the air conditioning. Some really interesting amenities that they have. I had mentioned one of the big concerns that you see is privacy. Some of the developers, manufacturers, have actually been addressing that with smart glass, so that if the gondolas are traveling along where there might be high-rise condos or businesses, the glass will actually fog up so that those that are in the cabin can't actually view inside the buildings, which is kind of cool. Here's the different types of gondolas. They're basically divided between how many cables there are, 1, 2, or 3 cables. And then there's the aerial tram as well, which can actually fit up to 200 passengers in many cases. Where there are gondola operating and discussions happening in the US, there's actually a lot of areas that have had serious conversations or studies related to urban gondolas. 2 are operating in the United States. So you have the Portland tram, as well as the Roosevelt in New York. Both of those are those aerial trams that I was just mentioning, where they can fit more passengers. There's also some discussions, just to mention, in Florida, since that's where we are. Orlando has just implemented their gondola system, and Miami, for the Super Bowl, had implemented a very short gondola system for the Hard Rock. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Pinellas County has obviously had lots of conversations regarding gondolas and other similar style types of technologies like the people mover transit systems. So onward towards some emerging technologies. Air taxis and urban air mobility. So this has absolutely not been around as long as the gondola system, but it has been part of discussions and engineering conversations since the 1950s and 1960s. There's definitely, everybody's been imagining flying cars of some sort, and there is actually air taxis out there today utilizing helicopters, but similar style services, more expensive, more impacts to the environment, of course. But the next evolution is going to be into the eVTOL, which is the electric vertical takeoff and landing technology, which is what we're going to focus on for the purpose of this study. It's an emerging market because of a lot of the technological advances that we've had in the last few years. As I mentioned, that electric vertical takeoff and landing is really going to lower the noise profile, which has been one of the biggest concerns with helicopters, especially if you're deploying within urban settings, having helicopters everywhere. The emissions, so being environmentally conscious, as well as the longer lasting batteries. The batteries have been important because in order to make those longer trips, you have to have a longer life on the battery. There's a lot of noise, I'll say, out there right now. There's probably news clips every single day related to air taxis and eVTOL technology. There's between 100 and 170 developers out there that are in this ballgame right now in these discussions, which is why we're hearing a lot about it. There are, in order to help streamline the different technology and vehicles, we've basically divided them up between multi-rotor, lift and cruise, and the vectored thrust. This is based on the kind of technology that's used for each of these vehicles, and it makes it a little easier when put in these defined buckets how to analyze and evaluate the technology, especially if you're talking with developers and manufacturers. So the multi-rotor, as you can see, it does not have wings. It has circulator actuator, so it's really great at hovering. Not so great at cruising. So it has lower speeds. It's not going to go as fast as some of the other options. And it doesn't have a very long distance. It goes between 10 and 25 miles. So this type of technology, I put a few example companies that are working on this. This kind of technology is going to be the kind that you see in those shorter urban style trips, business trips, quick trips to the airport, or just urban passenger freight type circulation in an urban downtown core. The lift and cruise can hover and cruise, as in its name. It actually has two different propulsion systems, though, for both of those activities, which is somewhat inefficient, along with the fact that you have to take off. It doesn't just instantly hover. Makes it harder to provide point-to-point travel options. It does have a much faster cruising speed, and it can cover up to 60 miles. Now, the vectored thrust is part of this new evolution. It's fixing some of the things that we see with the lift and cruise. It doesn't have two different propulsion systems. It has one single propulsion system that's used for the hovering and the cruising, which is making it have the capability to provide that point-to-point type of travel that you want to see in an air taxi, so to speak. There's a lot of companies that are working on this. It has the same, the range, the distance that we saw on the lift and cruise, which is efficient, and it goes up to 180 miles per hour. Now, from a market standpoint, NASA has actually commissioned 2 market studies that were led by different contractors to determine what the actual air market might look like. The first is the last mile delivery. The second that's come from this is the air metro. And the third is the air taxi, which we were just talking about. The last mile delivery, I'm not going to spend too much time on because that's not the purpose of this study. However, it's important that we watch it as regulations are coming out related to the last mile delivery. We'll want to see how that may impact air metros and air taxis and the deployment of any other kind of urban air mobility. Air metros. So I want to distinguish between the air metros and the air taxis. This is basically how would they operate in the sky in more simple terms. The air metro is more predetermined within very specific corridors. Think of a bus route. So the actual air taxis would have to travel within a certain route. it would be predetermined schedules. So you would know that you're going from point A to point B. There's generally going to be more passengers in the actual vehicle. So you might see more, like up to 3 people traveling on the predetermined route. Some of the infrastructure requirements, which is going to be very, very important, is the vertiports. So think of a station or an intermodal center, only it has the helipad. And you'll hear it referred to as vertiports, vertihubs, or vertistop, it's really depending on the size of the stop. You'd have to have quite a few to make it function properly as a system. There'd have to be charging and service stations. There'd have to be an urban air mobility traffic management system, which, today there's commercial aviation, there's a traffic management system that manages that. It would be necessary as well for this whole new industry to also have an air traffic management system. The air taxi. So the air taxi is probably something that the air metro could evolve into. It wouldn't necessarily just start off as an air taxi service, because it would be point to point. So it's very similar on the ground. We would compare it to an Uber style service. You pull out your mobility app, you say, I want to fly here, it picks you up in 5 minutes and you're there. If there's a vertiport though, right? So it's very similar infrastructure as the air metro, only you're going to have a lot more vertiports, a lot more vertistops in order for it to function. The infrastructure and the operations, I'm really just hammering on that because these two components are what a lot of the locals are going to have purview over and are going to be really important. You're going to want to make sure that there's enough infrastructure to support this kind of new mobility option. They're not inexpensive either, especially with the electric charging. So it's just something to consider, especially when planning for the future, when considering zoning, so for actual infrastructure. And as I mentioned, the air traffic management system, which we'll have to see how that evolves at the federal level too. The operations, very similar to fleet operations that you'd have to have for transit. There'd have to be some level of certifications for pilots probably in the beginning, because automation is still a key issue right now in the regulatory process. And then, of course, the actual operating certification is something that we'd all have to consider. The implementation status. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of companies out there. A lot of them are working on or are already capable of getting this technology functional. The biggest holdup, I would say, is the regulatory process. There's a lot that the FAA has to work through. NASA's doing a lot of studies to support that as well right now. But their main focus, the issues that they're most concerned with are the air traffic management system that I mentioned, infrastructure, the trajectory-based operations for the aircraft, and then public trust and acceptance. That's key. For it to be successful, people will have to feel comfortable in eventually an automated vehicle flying. One of the things, the reason I have one of the quotes from the FAA executive director, when I was talking about infrastructure, it's not just constructing new vertiports. The consideration we also have to consider the fact that we have a lot of rooftops, which might seem like that's great. We can just use the rooftops, but you have to provide enough support on the rooftops. A lot of elevators don't actually go to the rooftop. So now you have to work on making buildings more accessible as well. So lastly is the Hyperloop. Again, it has been a concept that has been discussed for many, many years. Elon Musk really brought it back up to the forefront when he produced that Hyperloop Alpha paper. And it kind of challenged the industry to really come back with some of these, with developing this technology more. Basically, it's a high-speed transport for passengers and freight. Many believe that it will actually function first for freight before passengers. It's a grade separated vacuum system. So no matter how it's constructed, whether it's elevated, at grade, or under the ground, it would be grade separated because of that tube. It would be fully autonomous. The capsules are about 100 feet, and they go between they're intended to go 760 miles per hour. So far, they have reached 265 miles per hour in the tests. The basic propulsion system is a linear electric motor to propel the capsules forward, and then it uses a levitation. The vendors, the companies that are working on this technology right now are focused on the passive mag levitation, which is a little different than the Elon Musk air-bearing suspension, but they're all focused on that maglev technology. So from the infrastructure standpoint, the vendors are, when we've spoken with the different vendors, it's typically considered less right-of-way than some of the alternative types of options like high-speed rail. The width is slightly smaller, but a lot of them consider the fact that you can elevate it and go under the ground as part of what would have less of a right-of-way impact. But we in Florida know there's some concerns with underground, so we'd want to obviously look at that as any feasibility analyses continue. The corridors themselves have to be pretty straight. Any kind of horizontal or vertical alignment shift will actually keep the Hyperloop from keeping the quick speed that makes it so efficient. So you have to look at identifying more straight corridors for this technology. And the market that it's serving is that inner city, so city to city. Between that 200 and 500 mile apart distance is really what they see as the sweet spot for that technology to be able to get a cost benefit and efficiency benefit. The 2 to 3 minute headways, I would just mention again, this is vendor information. This is part of what the concept includes. It has not operated, so only time will tell with some of that. There's 3 companies. I like to mention this because I know when I talk to friends and family, everyone thought Hyperloop was just a company. And it's actually several companies that are all trying to develop a technology. Virgin Hyperloop One and Hyperloop Transportation Technologies are really the 2 that are doing the most in the US, but they're all working throughout the world. They have agreements with different governments, they're conducting feasibility analyses, and they have demonstration areas. This map, just so that you have an idea of what's going on within our country, you can see there are activities and studies happening all over. I would say the most predominant one has been the Great Lakes Feasibility Study, which was released at the new year, which has really been providing a lot of information for the rest of our industry to learn about the Hyperloop TT technology. There's also 2 test sites in the country. You've got DevLoop, which is in Nevada. That is a Virgin Hyperloop One test site. And you also have SpaceX. They have they have one that's for smaller pods for speed tests in Hawthorne. There's conversations also around the world. So there's agreements with different governments. There's a lot of challenges out there to try to be the first to build it. We've certainly seen that there's going to be Hyperloop somewhere in the world by mid-2020. But as I mentioned, there are test tracks. That's all we have built so far. The other test track for Hyperloop TT is actually in France. And they just recently finished it, but they have not tested the actual capsules on the tracks. So time will tell. There's definitely some development. Again, the regulatory framework is going to be critical with this. They still probably have some safety testings and things like that to do. So we've heard this year, but I would probably anticipate that not coming to fruition. This is where we are in the process. We're completing the research. You've heard a lot of what we've been researching so far. We've been having a lot of industry interviews that are going to continue into March. And then we're going to really do a deep dive into the governance and regulatory framework, where they are, what are the concerns and issues for each of the technologies, so that you all can have a really good understanding of that before we get into some of the actual corridor analysis, where we're going to look at key connections for each of these technologies for the Tampa Bay region, and complete by July. So with that, I will take any questions.
Thank you for that great presentation. Questions? Really, as we very much look forward to your continuing efforts on that and the thorough research you're doing.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, the chair now recognizes Rahul Gupta from Deloitte. Welcome. Would you like David to give a brief bio, or would you like to?
Please, by all means.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually had a chance to talk to Rahul a little bit in Miami at the Florida Automated Vehicle Summit. He gave a presentation to the group down there, which was very intriguing, and I'm glad he was available to come present to TBARTA's board. But Rahul is a renowned expert on smart cities, mobility, and smart infrastructure and related technology. He has over 30 years of combined federal government and private sector experience leading major initiatives in mobility, smart cities, infrastructure, ICT, and innovation. He previously served as Smart Mobility Advisor to the European Union and has published numerous studies and given speeches on the topic of urbanization, smart cities, resilience, and sustainability. Rahul is an adjunct faculty at Georgetown University's graduate program and is engaged in STEAM activities. He has a master's degree in public policy and international relations, along with a bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Chicago. So thank you for being here, Rahul.
Thank you, David.
Thank you very much. Good morning, and Mr. Chairman, board members. Today, I'm going to focus on setting the stage of what smart infrastructure, smart cities is, and kind of follow up on the presentation on MCORs and what you just heard in terms of future cities. I think the state of Florida is quite well ahead of the other states in the United States of America in terms of addressing those issues. So let me see, can I get the presentation on board? There you go. Perfect, thank you. What you see here, go to the next slide. Our approach to smart cities and smart infrastructure really focuses on the needs of the citizen. As we heard earlier, this is all about making sure that economics, the ability to move, get to a job, and to live with the quality of life is what everybody is seeking. And we've built our infrastructure the last 300 years a particular way, and I think as Commissioner Long was saying, technology is going to disrupt it in a way that is for the better. So our approach is focused on the citizen, it's focused on the sustainability, and most importantly, how do we bring technology and inject that into our infrastructure? How do we make our roads smarter? How do we make our rail smarter? How do we change the bus route from a fixed route to one that reacts dynamically to the need of the citizens and leverage technology to create dynamic payments? And to do that, it starts with the infrastructure. You need to have the fiber, you need to have the 5G opportunities, and you need to put the sensors into the ground. So if you're gonna spend $1 billion, and those $1 billion are going to do what you did the last 100 years, it's gonna give you $800 million worth of value. But if you spend the $1 billion and spend the next $100 million to really inject technology in the infrastructure by creating citizen-centric investments, those partnerships we just talked about, and the innovative technology, the $1 billion might give you $2.5 billion worth of value. You're going to create a new value chain that doesn't exist today. So the foundational infrastructure for this is absolutely critical. Is this something new? No. It is something that's been going on for the last 30-some years. Singapore started in 1997 by calling themselves Smart Nation. The United States government actually is funding part of the 100 Smart Cities mission in India. Astana, Kazakhstan, which is the 4th largest from a physical size, ninth richest in terms of economics, built one for 15 million people. And then you've got the Dutch and Netherlands, who are dealing with water, and they've been dealing with it for 100 years, something Florida is going to be also addressing. San Diego, with their MPO, has been at the forefront. Columbus won the DOT challenge, and Atlanta is figuring out what does a smart corridor look like. Houston is figuring out how smart corridor. And Florida here is truly ahead of everyone in terms of having a business environment that's ready for investment. This is just a summary in terms of testing, piloting, and scaling. We can talk about technology today, but what's really important is, can we demonstrate that it works, and can we scale it so that citizens and businesses can take advantage of it? Clearly, the legislation create a business-friendly environment. What Florida can do in terms of smart infrastructure is to let the private sector know that you're open for business. And I think between the Florida DOT, the US DOT through ITS, is truly doing a remarkable improvement in how we can deploy those technologies. Something that I worked with back in 2010, 2011, if you haven't had the opportunity to visit Backwalk Ranch in Florida, I would recommend that you go visit it. It's one of the few smart cities that nobody talks about, but Sid Kitson and his partnership really started that back in 2010, 2011. It's one of the few cities in the world that truly is zero carbon, green energy, recycles water, and they've been testing autonomous for the longest period of time. And it's a fabulous story that I think started in Florida way back when. So we heard a little bit about the investment that you're making, and you've taken those smart steps. I would say that it only works well when everybody's in it together. And I would say in the 35, 40 smart cities projects I've done, from Abu Dhabi to Dubai to Singapore to Montreal to even in the United States, it starts with a clear set vision. What are you trying to accomplish? And answering three simple questions. Where are we going? So in case of TBARTA, you're going to set the agenda. How are we going to get there? You've got the investment, you've got the enabling legislation, as well as some of your pilots. And why are we going to be successful? I think the success will truly depend on the ability to demonstrate that you've got both citizens and the environment and the business in mind. So when we look at the premium transit on I-275, you've got the opportunity to think through, why would you move people out of a car that is flexible, that is easily accessible, to something that may be more constraining? The rest of the world has shown that by leveraging technology and getting to autonomous pod, which gives you 3 to 5 minute wait, you can actually go from that autonomous pod into something that takes less space, that moves faster, and may be more cost effective, all the time reducing the CO2. We're talking about TBARTA looking at future technologies. I sat in a volocopter in 2016. I actually have experience in air taxi, and I was helping build the infrastructure for air taxis in Dubai. And we are one of the companies, as Deloitte, who is doing the study for NASA in terms of what it takes to make air taxis real, both in terms of infrastructure and the entire regime from 3,000 feet on down. So happy to talk to you about that as well. And we have been talking to the program manager for THEA in terms of what it takes to get to the next step. Florida is going to have the opportunity to make a big impact in terms of the technologies that's deployed for 5G. Effectively, you want real-time information. You really want to be able to connect the devices, the assets, and the transportation modalities so that you can take safety and security out of the conversation. Now it's more in terms of feasibility. And I think as part of your plan, if you're leveraging the ability of 5G to disrupt, and what is 5G after all? 5G is a set of rules and standards that allows two pieces to talk to each other in real time. So a car is going to talk to another car in front of it. It's going to talk to a car to the side of it, and it's going to allow you to bring the cars closer to each other, so you don't have to have 7 car lengths. So you could put more cars on the same physical surface, but you could also move those cars faster along those lines If those cars talking to the traffic light, it's also talking to the street furniture, the light pole, the benches, the cable boxes. So you're going to improve the ability to actually take advantage of the physical surface, but you're also going to change the way the behavior of the driver and how the car is doing. That technology exists today. I sat in an autonomous car that talks to another car that doesn't need to a stop sign in 2005 in the Warren Tech Center at Michigan, General Motors Michigan Proving Grounds. Technology has been around for a long time. It's just a matter of how do we bring it all together so that you've got the right partners and you can crowd in the investment. And Florida and TBARTA is really at that edge, given the fact that US DOT gives you some of the biggest grants, but also you've got the ability to bring in somebody from a telecom industry and somebody from a fiber industry to really enable that. So what are some of the capabilities you're talking about? I touched on the V2X, the Vehicle 2X, autonomous human driver backup. The enablers are absolutely critical. If there's one investment you can make where people will be knocking on your door says, let us test out this technology, let us help your citizen, let us help your business, it would have to be those 5G networks, the vehicle data sharing network. You're one of the few states and you're in one of the few cities in the United States through THEA and the autonomous test that you're doing under Vic Bide, who's the program manager. And the benefits, I think, just speaks for themselves. Wherever this technology has been deployed, whether it's in Paris, whether it's in Rome, whether it's in Dubai, the behavior of the people have started to shift. They see this flexibility. They see the fact that they don't need to have a piece of metal that weighs 5,000 pounds to move an average 200 pounds. That costs you insurance, that costs you maintenance. And if you give them the flexibility, that behavior starts shifting. Clearly, you have to adopt it and adapt it for the Florida environment. But if Dubai can do it for 110-degree weather, or Astana, Kazakhstan can do it for minus 55-degree weather, there is no doubt that Florida can do it for something where there's always sun and sand and sea and whatnot. So you're going to increase the efficiency of trips, you're going to decrease the congestion, and the transit accessibility, I think, fundamentally changes how people come and start becoming your taxpayers. Florida is already welcoming so many more people than they can accommodate. So how do you actually inject that technology in real time to not only provide the features, the enablers, but also the benefits? Mobile applications, fleet telematics, and smart buildings. Those are the kind of technologies that TBARTA can leverage today to create a seamless transit experience. You can do pilots today without going too far afield. You do not have to wait for 15, 20, 30 years. And I admit that sometimes the planning does take that long and you're gonna do a large project. It can take a long time. But at the same time, you can do some small pilots. San Antonio is doing 5 innovation zones. Broward County is considering several innovation zones. And you have some innovation zones. But in those innovative areas, you can actually create those integrative mobile applications. You can do fleet telematics. The industry is ready to actually embrace a municipality that gives them the ability to do so. And as you can see, the Tampa Bay partnership is building smart buildings. So you already have all the elements and all of the pieces, the puzzles here, where you can go through an entire value chain from start to finish. Mobile access, e-vehicle shared transit hubs, subway, light rail, bus, and the bike and walkways. So you can address resiliency, you can address sustainability. Those particular approaches that can be embedded in your plan, it's already listed there, and I know there is a request for additional information, actually sets you up for success in a way that few cities can claim that they will be able to do. So how do you do that? I think you've already got pretty much all of the elements of success here. You've got yourselves, you've got a legislature that wants to move forward in the area of autonomous and connected compared to the rest of the United States. I'll admit it's not Dubai. I'll admit it's not the EU. My first truck platooning oversight was for the EU back in 2016. But there are already 8 tests being done in the United States in terms of how you move logistics forward. Really engaging community organizations to understand the needs of the citizens is absolutely critical, because shaping the behavior of a 5-year-old that's willing to do ride sharing in a way that is consistent with the foundations of sustainable resilience is where it starts. You may not be able to catch somebody like me at the age of 57 who wants to change, but you may be able to change the perspective of somebody who's 5, 10, 15 years old. And also understanding how private mobility providers are disrupting. It's not the automotive companies that are truly disrupting. It's the two people in a garage that have figured out that there's a niche market. And you need to be able to tap into those kind of innovations as well. So concluding thoughts, you know, what do I think about when somebody calls me and say, hey, you've done this, you've done that, we'd like to do something similar. I said, what is the innovative thinking that you're bringing so that you're not thinking the way we have done for the last 100 years? Thinking really in terms of a pilot, testing it out, and then scaling very quickly, not over the period of years or decades. The first time somebody brought up a scooter, they didn't ask anybody's permission. They just dropped them off. And people said, what is that? And then everybody was using their supercomputer, which is effectively this, to take a photo, do the e-payment, and then go first mile, last mile. A lot of cities had to catch up with the legislation. They had to create the kind of blockade. San Diego had to say, well, we're going to create a new law that says you cannot do this, you cannot do that. What is that next innovative thinking in terms of the roadway, the rail, the air, the underground that's fundamentally going to change? I think technology is not going to wait for you, but you can embrace it and you can bring that innovative thinking to say, show us the change, the percentage change that we can deploy. Be citizen-centric. I think that one thing I've learned, whether I've operated in the Middle East, in Central Asia, in North America, in the US, is that if you're going to create jobs that are accessible and you're going to make that commute relatively easy by being able to give options, first mile, last mile, and everything in between, you'll have a tax base that sticks to you. And that's what you want. You want those 18 to 36 that want to live here and they'll pay the taxes and they want to make a difference. And that citizen centricity sometimes is missed in a big way. And then attracting talent. We've got lots of smart people in this room, engineers and planners and zoners. Are you really organized? And do you have that innovative thinking that just oozes from every conversation? We have a number of projects underway at Deloitte where we're helping transportation leaders understand what is the future workforce for transportation? How do you move from transportation to mobility? Who are the people that need to be hired between the ages of 26 and 36 who may come in and leave, who will fundamentally bring a new way of thinking and augment the talent and the workforce that you already have? And for us, that is fundamentally, and for me personally, that's fundamentally what I have learned doing these projects globally and in the United States, is that if you have people that challenge you and ask questions every day, why don't do it this way? Why do we do it this way? It makes a big difference. And with that, I thank you and I'll take your questions.
Thanks so much for that wonderful presentation, by the way. And let me lead off with a question, too, that immediately came to mind, because I know we talked about smart cities before and then smart states and so forth. Do you see this, the beginning point of a city taking the initiative, like, for example, New York City or whatever, to become smart and tell someone wanting to avail themselves of transportation modes, hey, I want to get from my house in Long Island to Manhattan. I go on my mobile app, what's the best way to do using multiple modes? You see that done at a city level, or as we grow into a more state or regional level? And the reason I bring that up is TBARTA could be a great vehicle within our entire Tampa Bay region to pioneer such an app, to do that as an amazing way of doing that. Because I know certain cities are leading the way, but you get into an issue if I want to go from Tampa to Orlando, for example. But if you have a regional effort, you might be able to have a creative app that says, I take the ferry here, I take the bus here, I take the train here, the Virgin train, whatever. So I'm just curious as to the way you see this operating from a local level up or more of a centralized level down.
Yeah. Let me address the question from a couple of perspectives. A regional perspective, I think is absolutely critical. If I were to ask you, do you know where a trip is originated for somebody who comes to work in Tampa and where it ends, the answer most likely is going to be no, right? Because we create artificial boundaries in terms of the way we're organized. But nature doesn't care, a road doesn't care. It doesn't matter where you start Pinellas County and where you end up another county. The fact that I'm commuting from one part of the region and I'm moving to another part of the region creates traffic. So understanding that is foundational. So how New York and the prior mayor did this is by saying, I'm going to make that data available and I'm going to outsource it. Within 72 hours, the data that's created in the city of New York is available to anyone. So academics, researchers, innovators, venture capital, they can leverage the data. The regional approach is very important because you can only push traffic so far before you don't understand why it is being created to begin with. So moving from data forward is critical. Having an open data policy is absolutely foundational. Because if all that information is available to all the investors, it's available to yourself, you'll be able to understand who's coming in, who's going, and then create and visualize that particular information. The cities that have been able to address traffic and congestion, and I have to say that, if you improve it 2 to 3%, you're doing very well, because it's complicated. It's not as simple as I'm going to time the signal, it's going to fix everything. It's not. It's much deeper than that. So I would start with the data, and if you're one of the cities that actually saying we're open for business and we have an open data policy, you will see transformation like you haven't seen before.
Commissioner Long.
Well, I have to say, you are speaking to my heart today. Seriously. And I would like to invite you to participate in our transportation summit that we're in the process of planning as we speak, which will be in August of this year. I think it would be transformational for a lot of folks who are not in this room right now, but who are very interested in this subject matter and who really are committed to trying to make a difference, not only for those of us that live here, but for our kids and for our grandkids.
I cordially accept, and it would be my pleasure.
I'll give you the dates and the place as soon as we adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Other questions? Yes.
Which city did you say was the smartest city?
It's hard to say if there is a smartest city. The one that's been working across all the elements of transportation has to be Singapore, but it's more like a state.
Okay.
But in the state of Florida, Babcock Ranch, which is by Fort Myers, is truly something that is very unique, and most people don't know about it. Mm-hmm. And they've been around for a long time. Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Hong Kong, a bespoke city which was created just outside of Incheon, South Korea. Its name is Songdo. They spent $70 billion building it from scratch. Everything is connected, everything is autonomous, everything is smart. But it's hard to really characterize a city as a smart city because you have to connect so many different infrastructure activities. Water, power, transportation, mobility, cameras, safety, security, buildings. So there's quite a lot of cities that are doing that. I think in the United States, this is starting to finally come back in because it's hard to do the infrastructure improvements if you don't get federal dollars, if you don't get state dollars. That's why Broward County has its surtax. Hillsborough is going to have its surtax. Miami-Dade. And my hope is that next time you ask me, I would say it would be Tampa.
But you had mentioned a city that had zero.
That is Babcock Ranch. It's
That is
built
Babcock.
around. It's
Okay.
built around the green power grid. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions? Thanks so much, and we look
Thank you.
forward to working
Appreciate
more
it.
with you.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. That concludes our regular program. Is there any new business for the regular portion of the meeting? Okay, none being heard, we are going to take a 15-minute break now, and then we're going to have a briefing on the steering committee review for the transportation summit. So we are adjourned for 15 minutes.
So I have a question. You're gonna let me chair? Oh, of course.
I just have to do that. A lot more. Oh, I know, but then I'm going to.
You did a lot more, all right?
Well, and I'm glad she mentioned
Right.
something to him because I wanted to. I mean, we want to make it big.
We meeting in?
Yeah, right back here.
A big attendance for that event. And you want people like Rahul and like folks that were at the FDOT summit in to
Do
speak.
we have lunch coming in? So we gotta bring it in here, or we gonna need it?
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to come in here. It's like variety of sandwiches. I will drop you. Yeah, that's what's going to make it interesting.
David?
That's what's going to pull people in.
I think he's bringing it
Is
in
he
here.
gonna, are you gonna make an announcement about where we're meeting?
Hey, how are you? Good to see you.
I think we're meeting in here.
Oh.
It's going to be in here.
The lunch is gonna be in?
I imagine. I'll find out. I don't know what time it was supposed to be delivered and where it's going to go. That Jennifer coordinated all that, but I'll find out.
Hey, Danny, I did talk to Raul already about the summit. I wanted to make sure if the opportunity was there.
You know, I'm gonna go give him my card right now.
Danny?
Yes.
Danny? Okay, yeah.
She is currently getting skin cancer removed up until.
Yes, yeah. She mentioned that.
She's incredibly interested in transportation, take notes.
Oh, good. Okay.
And she did have some input to provide early on, and she didn't know how she could release that for me or if I could tell you again. Just that she thinks, being that it's late August, it's about a little over a week after the primary. So that was no concern. Maybe creating more of the buffering going into September. And also, she's arranged last
No, I know, I'm coming to get a card. Sorry.
either it's really hot or it's
Okay. I think Commissioner Long, Danny is here from
I know,
Commissioners.
I've been texting with her, she's been watching the meeting while we've been,
Oh yeah, she was in pre-op, and then was that you that she texted?
Yes.
Okay.
yes.
Tell my man I said
Okay.
hello. All right? Not into jumping off buildings nowadays.
I will mark you an email. You have a fabulous week.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much. Where's home for you?
I'm in DC, but I'm on planes. I spend 50% of my time actually in Florida. So between Broward and Hillsborough and Orlando,
Well, we love to invite you to Clearwater, where we're headquartered, and we're located in an opportunity zone, which allows for a funding mechanism that is fairly new. So, it ties into the opportunity zone program, benefits to launch.
Kind of sandwiches? All right, yeah, I was curious on that.
And he's from here, so.
I kept looking at it, I was trying to will it over here.
Very wise.
Presentation.
Yeah, it is. We gave it to her. She's the one who organized that. Absolutely. You should be able to get her.
Slow fun Fridays.
Hello? I've been working with Rich.
I was mentioning here, what's my and so you can travel that concept. This is like all these broader than transit.
I dropped my dog. Drop her for an hour. What is it? That's what we're doing. So I tried it out.
That's where TBARTA should be. We should be thinking.
The area where.
Yeah, no, I think, and you know, and all I do is back them in.
Observe the dynamics.
2 guys in the garage. We're not quite the 2 guys in the garage. There's 10 guys in the office suite. Recognition that there is a free enterprise solution available.
And because that would be conducive to a conversation.
Jennifer, we're not eating it.
We want to see this happen. I said to your father, it goes to the indication now, years I'm glad you met. Well, I ran into another West Point graduate. In fact, 2 of them. Get into all these other things, because I think it's not, it is.
Ah.
Yeah, we were, I was at the meeting. Yeah, yes, I remember. Very good. You try to get smart.
Hey.
Yeah. Yeah.
Program today.
This is good, yeah.
If I could have asked one question of the study is there any feasible way for a gondola to connect with the airport? The answer is no, because of the height of the towers, that it would interfere with the instrument landing system or the access clearances that would be necessary. Could be wrong, but it's
Could be, yeah.
Sure. This is not.
Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you again. This is the only room they had available, so yeah, I think that's what
You know, they have the Eiffel frame, you know, we do all this stuff, and also we just entry. Huh? So they're gonna deal with that thing. Downtown.
We're gonna have to go back.
Kind of like a pilot.
No, I'm saying, but
Yeah, he just got promoted, so he's delegating to someone else. So good for him. Just get started. Yeah, yes. See, we own, yeah, they we own a whole. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, anything help? Like. Yeah.
Where is it?
Back at that left.
Guys are grabbing mints. Right there. I thought so, we didn't get.
Oh, okay.
I want to keep that, we've got it under.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going over Sunday.
Oh, yeah.
David, how you doing?
Yeah, talk to me.
Yeah, they said the center there, I think. Meanwhile, or Edie.
Did they bring lunch in for everybody?
Yeah, in the back corner back there.
Absolutely.
Salad.
Oh, hello. Good. How are you? Oh.
They still have to adjourn.
Wow.
after that meeting, because that's on the board meeting agenda.
Yeah.
We're going to grab chairs and move to the center island there, but decide to go ahead and eat very smooth.
Yeah.
She's not making enough progress.
He said we can't get audio if we're at that table.
We have to stay here.
So for the public.
Yeah, because we're still part of the notice meeting, yeah.
I mean,
Live streaming.
I wasn't going anywhere until you told me to, Chair.
Thank you, sir. There you go.
I follow rules.
yeah.
You must have a lot of fun down in the Manatee area. Every time I'm down there, I always enjoy it.
Well, it's a lot of.
There's a lot going on in different ways.
What on, my friend?
I think they have to do the live streaming up here.
I hear that you're getting ready to have a meeting in District 7,
They've got to be able to watch.
David, about the band pool options or whatever options. Y'all ever consider doing any type of connectivity from, you know how we have the rest areas on the other side? I just thought about it. It's tough right there. They're doing a lot of great work there and changing some things around, but you start looking for areas for people to connect and things like that. That's not. Right. Right, that's what I was thinking.
Back out again soon.
You know how I am. Hey, you got any information on my turn signal light or the survey? Okay. Yes, sir, yes, sir. That's my guy right there. I'm telling you, that guy's good. Good. I'm like, man, I don't know about a half. Rationing.
You have a hard life. I feel horrible for you. You're traveling all
That
the
only
time.
took place when you got married.
David,
Like getting to see the
I think there's
world.
enough food back there for everybody if Richard or, you know, some guys are saying.
So what were you in London for?
So it was,
There's quite a few sandwiches,
Israel that fell through February.
salads.
It was postponed to October.
I didn't want him to think he couldn't have something.
We already had the time. Had the meetings changed, et cetera.
Richard's here, I just saw me.
I was passed up.
I think he definitely could grab something.
Had a good time, that was something. Context that was good.
Thanks, that's great.
Guiding. I've been over there once. I mean, it really is impressive. Yeah.
That's my pile, but you're welcome to share it.
No,
Do you want to eat first, or go ahead and start?
well,
I moved it out of the way because I was
this
making
is
a mess.
supposed to be a stakeholder
That's the first time
meeting.
I ever saw a Lamborghini, and I almost.
Let me
shut off the
let me
curb and got
reconvene the
hit by
board.
it
She has to call the roll again.
As it was going by.
For a workshop.
No, but after we conclude our meeting, then we'll conclude.
Oh, I thought we were.
No,
I thought we
that
were
was the whole,
adjourned.
Did we adjourn?
I thought so, but I guess not.
part of the regular meeting.
Do they charge a fee for bringing cars into the city? I thought I heard that. Yeah.
No, but it is a great idea.
We're gonna
Include all of our
reconvene.
board meetings.
Yeah, to try to encourage people to use mass transit.
Reconvene the board, so in Beijing.
Yeah, because we have not officially been adjourned. Yeah, it's not a, that was,
Sorry, I'm out there just
David told me that.
snobbing and everything else. A lottery.
Could everyone take their seats?
I turned on it twice.
Wow. Yeah, imagine that.
I'm gonna reconvene the meeting. Jennifer, please call the roll again.
Jim Holden,
Here?
Cliff Manuel,
Here.
Commissioner Janet Long,
Here,
Commissioner John Mitten.
Here.
Commissioner Pat Kemp is not here. Commissioner Reggie Bellamy.
Here.
Catherine Starkey is not attending. Commissioner Karen Steele. Here. Rick McLean.
Here.
Mayor President and Mayor Castor will not be attending. Secretary Flynn.
Here?
Secretary Mannion.
here.
Okay, thank you. I am now gonna recognize Commissioner Long to chair the steering committee meeting and give us an update on its procedures and where we are. You're recognized.
Thank you. Okay, so, I think you all should have received a copy of the 2020 TBARTA Transportation Summit outline. And before we have further conversation, I would just like to share that this is supposed to be a planning meeting, and I envisioned that there would be a lot of stakeholders here, given the list that we have outlined. And so I see Steve Hughes from Visit St. Pete Clearwater, and if, for those of you that are part of the stakeholders group, maybe you could come up and sit with us, because this is a very difficult configuration to have a planning meeting. Had I known we were going to be here, I would have scheduled us to meet somewhere else. But the fact of the matter is that, given that I've tried to make these schedule for these meetings coincide with our board meetings, it would really be helpful if we could make sure that we have an area that is conducive to conversation, so that we can accommodate those folks that are here representing other parts of our stakeholders group. So I see, where did Tony go?
Chairman, I make a recommendation that we, for future ones here, let's conclude our TBARTA meeting and have another meeting that you
I
chair
assumed
in
that's
another
what we
room.
were gonna
Well,
be doing, but,
staff told me to do it this way because they had noticed it in our meeting as a continuation of our meeting. I would have been very happy to do that.
thank you. Tony, come on up here, because you're part of our stakeholder group representing McDill. I'm looking to see, I see Danny out there who's here for Commissioner Starkey. I'd like you to come closer. This is supposed to be a conversation. It's not supposed to be just us participating. Steve, come on up. You can make yourself comfortable at this table right here.
I'm gonna have Ming sit up here.
Yes, absolutely. Ming, please. And we don't have to have any formality for this meeting, in my opinion. It's about a conversation, and I certainly want to get everyone's input. And because of the mic system here, I don't know really how we manage that other than to speak loudly so we can all hear. So number one, I'd like to just ask folks, just, it's a conversation, like a workshop. I think you've all probably participated in those before. So how about you give me some input on the outline, which we tried to make as broad as we possibly could so that we could end up with a really great work product. I'll share with you that Doyle has worked diligently to try to look for a date and a facility that would be amenable to host between 500 and 600 people, which is what we are anticipating we would have. And so we targeted late in the summer and had to work with the facility to come up with dates that they could accommodate us at. And right now, it's the 27th and 28th of August at the Tampa Marriott Waterside. We haven't formalized any agreement with them because we are waiting to have this meeting and see how that works with everybody. There were a lot of reasons why we chose that date, because we wanted to make sure that we didn't conflict with the election primaries, that we didn't conflict with kids going back to school, that we were able to work around a lot of other activities that are going on in the region at that time. So I'll open up the floor for whoever would like to chime in. How about Mr. Secretary? Any ideas, or Ming, or whoever's going to speak?
We've talked somewhat among ourselves, and then, of course, with David, and my understanding is we want this to be more of a public transportation forum, an innovative technology type of thing, as opposed to an overall general transportation in the region. In other words, I wouldn't think we would focus a lot on the larger road projects or aviation projects perhaps, but more public transportation and innovation? Is that?
Correct, but we would expect to have a lot of government representatives, because different from Hillsborough, for example, we have 24 cities in Pinellas County, and so a lot of them would be very interested. You can see that Steve Hughes. Why don't you introduce yourself, Steve, so everybody knows who you're representing, and then you might want to share with Santiago, and he can come maybe to the next one.
Good afternoon, Steve Hayes. I'm the President CEO for Visit St. Pete Clearwater. Been on the job week 8 after being gone for 7 years, but I was with Visit Tampa Bay before that, so glad to be part of this. And yes, I'll be happy to reach out to Santiago.
Good.
I also thought we discussed somewhat the TBARTA boundary doesn't necessarily represent the boundary of what this should be. For instance, Polk County certainly is very integral to the Tampa market, because we see more and more of a demand between Lakeland, over that area over to Tampa. And I imagine if you go further south, then you ask yourself, does Sarasota consider, Manatee, Sarasota is one MPO. And so setting the boundary of it is another question I guess I would throw out for any input. I certainly think Polk would be a logical one to include.
Okay.
City of Lakeland has some initiatives as well. LK, is that?
Yeah.
So, David and I talked about this, and I think Polk County definitely should be included in this because of the well-known fact that there is demand that runs, from Polk County into the Tampa Bay area, but also because the Sarasota Manatee MPO is a joint county MPO, it would make sense to bring Sarasota into the picture, particularly with MCAT and SCAT working together in trying to figure out some regional travel demand, how they meet that demand. So it would make sense to bring them in. That would be my recommendation also.
Okay.
And then Ming, we talked about perhaps the projects that, we tend to at least have some involvement in almost every one of the individual projects. And so perhaps a good portion of the program could be just to present all of the different transit initiatives. We have a number of bus rapid transit studies, we have the intermodal center studies. Other things you want to?
Yeah, and I think it's very important to set the theme of the summit first. We talking about technology focus, we talking about transit focus. Obviously, that's, what TBARTA is trying to accomplish. So, cover the area and set the theme. And once we set that theme, we figured out the sessions, speakers, and the target audience, because that's really important. So, like Secretary mentioned, I think it'll be good to mention all the transit projects within this region that we're trying to move forward, and we can present opportunities and challenges in doing those transit projects, because we'll face it every day. And I think that will bring people in, listen to those and try to, get solutions and find opportunity in that. I think, the way to attract audience, target their challenge, in their day-to-day life, in their job. So.
I mean, could we look at expanding that kind of brief to, when you talk transit, and I like that idea of all the transit projects and what's going on in the region, but also bring a flair of technology. What are you applying that's kind of new and envisioned, if you can?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, within project that we are doing, technology has always been one of the focuses, because, as the presentation you saw earlier, you can't do any project this stage without talking about future, automated technology, 5Gs, connected vehicles. I mean, all that need to be in a total package.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I was going. How does that relate, and how does that relate to the future and our expansion of that capability? So, yeah.
Well, another partner that would probably be good to participate in this would be THEA, based on their current pilot projects and the federal grant money they've received. We've got some pretty neat autonomous and connected vehicle pilots going on in downtown and on the crosstown that a lot of people probably haven't, heard as much about, and also how much that could lead to other things. We've also got the SunTrax Center that the Turnpike is building, and so we could also show how that center is going to become kind of an incubator for new technologies. Okay, anything else from technology on our side?
We can also bring in all our CVAV efforts into the conversation as it relates to the business model that the state of Florida Department of Transportation has developed on how we are going to tackle the technology that's coming to us as far as connected vehicles, autonomous vehicles, which will lead into the technology that could be used in the transit side, right? So we can leverage the resources we got in our central office.
I would think you'd want to bring in the ports as well, Port Manatee and Port Tampa, into this dialogue as well, because the interconnectivity of all those things is important.
Yeah, they were listed on the list of
And of course, at least in Tampa International is really wanting to become a bigger connected part of the transit system. And they're investing money into infrastructure to accommodate that future transit demand, which could be a partner there as well.
Okay, I see that Brad Miller has joined us from PSTA. A little late, but better late than never. Thank you, Brad. Okay, so I think it might be wise if we probably come up here, Brad, you're a stakeholder. If we could just maybe take these thoughts that we've heard this morning in terms of input and begin to think about programming. I think that's going to be obviously a major point that we have to tie down so we can begin to let people know and share information and you know, get a lot more folks involved. But would you think that it might be important to, so let's make sure we dot i's and cross t's. Is everybody good with the 27th, 28th in August at the Tampa Marriott Waterside? Commissioner?
I guess I'll just jump right in here. I had several thoughts. You know, you always do the who, what, when, where, how. You've already started to address where, but who is our market? I mean, is it governmental officials? Is it the public? You know, and we talked about the technologies. My thought was, you know, would it be better to have it, say, at the convention center where you might turn it into a home show where people could really come in and see the technologies? And I don't know whether they could be brought here. You know, that's the big question mark. But, you know, are we trying to excite the public with, you know, what's out there? I mean, today was very exciting to hear about what is in the process of happening, but, you know, it's like touch a truck. Is there a way to see something that literally would make people more interested in the different options available, both transit and technology? So that was, you know, are we going to do more speaking? You know, what is going to be the way that will be of greatest interest to people? So that's what, I think that's the first question is, who's your market?
Well, similar to how we did the climate conference and sea level rise summit, the focus was primarily to really, in my mind anyway, we have had a lot of conversations, all of us that serve on transportation boards, and we have become very, or quite knowledgeable, a lot more than the average person, obviously, by virtue of what we're doing. That said, I think you have to start somewhere. The convention center is really, really, really large. And this is the first time that we've tried to do a regional transportation summit. So in my head, I think the focus is on building awareness of the need and building awareness within our citizenry. You heard what this gentleman that was speaking before said, how important it was to be citizen-centric. And given the initiatives that are going on over in Hillsborough and the possibility of Pinellas County entering into the same kind of a discussion, I think it's important that people have a vehicle where they can come and hear about all of the things that we've been talking about for years. And so, while I think the convention center is a great idea, it's huge, and I'd like to see us maybe walk before we try to run in that regard. And I've been to a national transit conference over at the Tampa Bay Waterside, and they had lots of exhibits and lots of opportunities to showcase some of the rest of you have been there as well. When FDOT came, and there were exhibits and there were ways to set it up so that there is a lot of, you know, visual. Anyways, just.
I mean, so are we trying to do, I guess I'm also concerned to be honest, with the timing, it's, you know, content timing, if we're having referendums on both sides of the bay, is that our intent? I mean, again, are we talking technology, are we talking transit, you know?
I personally think we're talking both. And the way I looked at this event was to help level set, if you would, the information that's out there across the region, and then to also have what I would call a coming of the minds, in all honesty, aligning more people towards a regional idea of which way we're going. And that involves transit, and that involves the technology that can be applied to transit in a fashion that it would propel this region forward. So I really looked at it when I first saw it. I thought, okay, it's nice to have a level set, and then the coming of the minds, if you will, and all of it is focused, as Ming mentioned, on transit and technology and the way we're going. And I would almost say that their presentation on the projects that are happening within the region is fantastic. I think a lot more interest would be on the technology and the future that they're going to show based on some of the technology we're applying and how we get there. So that was my thought behind it.
Reggie?
Yeah, excuse me.
Sorry.
When we were talking about the Transportation Summit, my initial thoughts is what are we trying to, what message are we trying to get across to them? I mean, once everyone come and gather, when they depart, what are the takeaways? I think we need to make sure that we identify that within this group first, so we can work toward that. I mean, having the different people come out and do their marketing and look forward to all the different innovative things that are taking place, that's great, you know, but what's the step after that? So what are we trying to ultimately get accomplished? And I'm not necessarily sure I know right now, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think that personally, and we're just talking now, personally, I think that's absolutely true. We're still sitting here deciding what do we really want that message to be, and what do we want people to take away from the conference. In terms of space, you know, the Marriott Waterside has a large conference space there, so it would hold 500 to 600 people. And they also have, and I know this personally, they also have other rooms on the second and third floor for displayers and all that kind of stuff. So I think for the initial summit, I too believe that may be the perfect space. I think too large almost sends the wrong optic in terms of too large of a space. If you go in there and it looks empty, it looks like you don't have folks there. So just my food for thought.
Cliff?
I mean, from my perspective, I was kind of rolling through my mind when Commissioner Seal was talking about, I don't know if you could have it up and running by August of this year, but to touch the technology, to see the technology, be able to apply that to your own vision and sort of skill sets brings the most home to me when I go to these types of conferences versus listening to speakers. So, you know, if I wanted to go see technology displayed and understand it better, I would like to touch it sort of approach to that. And if we focus on that, we're going to need the room to do it. So sort of aligned in that area. I get the most from that type of visual. For me, I take away more from it.
Thank you, Cliff. David, and then Mingao.
In terms of a basic message, to me, it seems like a great opportunity to highlight for people what's already happening, because I think amongst the transit agencies and the different organizations that have been mentioned already, I feel like a lot is already going on that the common public doesn't really know about yet, and a lot of it is interrelated as well. So it's a chance to show what's happening and then what opportunities lie in front of us. And what I mean by that is we have the Envision 2030 plan, which is getting ready to finish. And as a part of that is a regional vision network. So, you know, to be able to broadcast that, to announce that to the public and explain to them what it is, what the recommendations are, what we see the vision of, commuter service throughout Tampa Bay being, I think would be very interesting to people, and then also to highlight the technology.
I do too. Mingao?
Yeah, thank you. Just along the line with what David mentioned, I think it's very important for us to set the theme, what that would be. Just remember a couple years ago, we had a regional transportation summit at the Airport Marriott. That was well attended.
Yeah.
And the reason being is, we basically restarting TBARTA. People see opportunity to implement regional transportation, not only, transportation, but transit opportunity. We had great opening speaker in Senator Galvano. That, basically focus on transit and how we can get transit implemented, and also transit-oriented development. That was a great discussion. So just, kicking from that, just really need to get, the theme set, something that people are interested in. And you can certainly add the technology aspect of it into that conference, that summit. Just from past experience organizing the Florida Automated Vehicle Summit, we had the first few, a couple of them here in Tampa, and we organized the first one, the department did. It was a tremendous effort just to bring a couple of the vendor here to do demonstration, because they brought in a couple of the automated shuttle. It really took a lot, and it took an entire year to organize that, to bring all the folks in, because they're busy, they're everywhere. There are only so many of them in the world doing this type of stuff, so they're on high demand. So it really takes a long time, to bring those folks here. So need to think it out, the availability of those people and the theme.
So I love how you framed it, Mingao, because if you think about it, that transportation summit at the Marriott, I believe, was in 2014, and here we are now in the second iteration of TBARTA, and it's a great opportunity for us to showcase how far TBARTA has come, how much we've moved the dial. Did I get that wrong?
I'm not sure what year it was, but I know I was already district secretary, and I wasn't district secretary till mid-2017, so I think that was actually in 2018, if I remember right.
Really?
Yeah.
Seems like it was so long ago.
Because it was during the time that we were already starting to talk about the tax referendum.
Because you wanted
and
more
that
done
was-
already.
that-
Yeah, that's
We actually had folks there signing up people on the petitions, if I remember right. And so, yeah, it's only been about 2 years, I think.
Okay, well, it's time to show what we've done then. Same point. I mean, I think it's a great time to be moving forward. Go ahead.
Okay, so then I'll jump right into the next subject. So based on.
You
the
turn your
28
mic, turn your mic.
I did turn it on. Based on the 2018 summit, what was the budget for that?
What was that?
The budget?
I don't remember, because.
Could we find out?
I do. I know what it was.
Yeah, we didn't hold that.
We weren't the organizers.
The partnership was.
Yeah,
Tampa
the
Bay
partnership held that, yes.
Because
They raised the money.
I was concerned with the amount of the budget that you laid out.
Well, yeah, that was just, to get everybody's attention.
Got attention, all right.
I knew it would.
Well, I just know if there's competing referendums that, I don't want to be tapping the same market per se. And again, who are we trying to reach? And I think we really have to answer that. What's our purpose and who are we trying to reach?
Chair, one comment I would make is I think we ought to showcase, at least with some visual graphics or a movie, the 3 projects we are studying and heard about today, which are the EVOLs, the Hyperloop, and the other technology. At least show a movie of them, do something along those lines, because that's what we, TBARTA, are about, and we're the sponsors of this deal. And if we can't bring an EVOL here, which would be a logistical nightmare, then let's at least show a nice group of pictures about what it does, maybe a movie presentation from some of the vendors, and kind of booths, as you were, that people can go in and maybe even hear a breakout session on one of those items, which will keep the cost down, but also provide kind of what we're attempting to do here.
Yes, John.
So to follow up and fill out that, the comments as to the target market and then the content takeaway, because there's such diversity of what's going on, whether it's emerging technologies, current projects, future projects, TBARTA as a brand, whatever, I like the idea of maybe having some initial TED Talk, 15, 20-minute stakeholder presentations, whatever, and then offering those the breakouts for 45 to an hour afterwards, so people could decide which one they wanted to go to. Ask the questions, listen to more detail of the specific thing they're interested in, because if we try to just hit one target market, it's going to be difficult to be able to do that. Some conferences even finish up with a forum Q&A, where those same presenters who've done both the TED Talks and the presentations and the breakouts now are able to field questions, which then kind of brings everything together for those different subsections that have gone and listened to it. So.
And have we decided if we're going for the public? I mean, is that target market? Is that where we're heading? Public, general public?
I think it can be for everybody that's interested in transportation.
Well, Commissioner Seal had asked the question. I was just curious on the feedback from the board. I mean, obviously it's a little different if it's the public versus all of us that are already sort of engaged in the subject. Or both, like you said, Commissioner Long. I was just curious on what your thoughts were.
I mean, I think it's both. And if you look at this stakeholders group, there's an awful lot of different entities that are on this sheet here that I'm not sure, I guess maybe we dropped the ball because we didn't notify every single one of them about this meeting and the fact that we were going to be having it. But I was very focused on wanting to have an initial conversation with the rest of you to see if you even liked the outline, if you thought it was, you know, taking everybody into consideration, if you looked at it at all, that just everybody and anybody is included. So right there, there's like 400 or 500 people if they all participated. Tony, we haven't heard from you.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Long. I guess one of the things that we look at MacDill Air Force Base is mode choice. That's becoming more and more important to everyone in our region. But I've got 19,000 employees there at the south tip of the Tampa Peninsula. And we've got both local and express bus service that we have in through HART. We are TBARTA's biggest van pool customer. But we're looking for more. We're looking for more options, more choices. We're all for the passenger ferry, and we're an integral partner with whoever on the government side that we can move that forward along with. We have a lot of folks that travel from the other side of the county and up through downtown, creating additional congestion for the city of Tampa to come and go from MacDill Air Force Base. The ferry is an excellent option for that. Also interested in kind of the Heart Flex type service, that first mile, last mile. How do we get people from the trunk line of transit and get them to their final destinations, or bring them to the terminal where they can get into the transit system? So especially technology on that side of it, that morphing of the demand response service is something that I think we need to talk about and refine, both the transit agencies as well as the region, because we need to feed this regional transit spine that we're creating, and that's that first mile, last mile. So when we talk about technology, let's also make sure that we're talking about the mode choice and how we're going to deploy these systems and get the citizens, get them involved in this.
Good. Yes, Danny.
Commissioner Starkey had just asked me to share with everyone that she had some reservations about the date. However, I did speak with Commissioner Long beforehand, and I understand that logistically that was sort of the only option. She just wanted to say that the September weather is more forgiving, and it would give us more of a buffer from the primary election.
You what?
It's a storm weekend. Normally, if you look at the major storms that came down from
Don't
August.
say that. What are you thinking? What is wrong with you?
We're talking history here.
If you look at the dates and things like that, from August like 23rd, 24th to August the 29th, which is my birthday, it's a lot, we have a lot of concerns.
Should we add resiliency to the agenda?
Right.
We're gonna have a birthday party to celebrate.
No, Saturday's already taken. We'll do it Thursday, Friday. But I'm just concerned, when I saw the dates, I'm like, I try not to do nothing during that time because a lot of the weather concerns that we have during that time of year.
Yes.
I do want to bring up the point based on what Ming mentioned, you know, the logistics and listening to all the comments and what we are looking for as far as the scale. Even if it is not to the scale of what Commissioner Seal was talking about, it's a lot of logistics and particularly trying to bring vendors in for display because the touch and feel and trying to have the vendors in, it all depends on who's going to be at the forum because they are going to come if they see that they're going to get benefit from it, right? You know, so we got to keep that in mind. But so my point is maybe we are being too aggressive on the timeline because we got to figure out all the things that need to be done to accomplish it successfully so that we can pick the timeline based on that. So first we got to decide on the scale and what are we trying to achieve before we decide on the time, based on what I heard. That's one thought I had. And the second thing is, I lost my train of thought. I got it back. The second thing is, you know, we got to really decide who the audience is going to be, right? You know, if it is going to be public, obviously all the partners, you know, that we identified will have to have that commitment to be at the forum. That will bring a significant number, but then if it is going to be public, then are we going to be charging, you know, a registration fee or not? That's something that we need to decide too, because if we charge, then you're not going to see as much public come in. But if you don't, where are the funds going to come in? Are you going to have the budget, enough budget from donations that you aren't, you know, to put together in the outline? Are we going to have that? So that's something that we need to think about too. So these are fundamental decisions that we need to decide on before we go forward with that.
Well, we started that preliminary discussion when we started working on the venue and the date. And because we were focused on modeling it in a way that replicated how we were so successful with the Climate and Sea Level Conference, the Resiliency Conference, we were following that guideline that we mapped out to do that conference, and we had a registration fee, just like any great big conference or summit that you go to. There was a registration fee, and there were different things that you could participate if you wanted to stay for the dinner the first night or whatever. You know, that was another cost that was added in. So that's kind of how we got to the fact that we were able to afford to do it. And we did have sponsors, and because of the interest that was generated by our stakeholders and the folks that were involved in the planning, we ended up raising a very substantial amount of money. So I was very more than excited and pleased about how we put that all together. So that's kind of the outline that we were focused on, which gave us kind of a jump start to be able to present some kind of an outline to you today. But it certainly isn't cast in stone, and that's why there have been, I want to repeat, no decisions made. This is just a recommendation about what we thought we could do based on how long it took us to do the other one.
So, Commissioner Long, I'm not sure if we're traveling down the road where we want this to be a revenue opportunity for TBARTA, but I do think we need to take in consideration there will be some expenses from TBARTA, and normally with the minds at the table, we definitely want our revenue to outweigh our expenses. So I think as we take in travel down that road, we need to keep that out in front of us. How are we going to address the expenses that will probably come up with this event? We don't want to put that burden on the financial office already, because we already have some financial issues. So what are we going to do? We may need a registration fee, or we may need to look at some type of sponsorship or something in that nature, in that area right there.
Well,
Corporate sponsorships are probably a good idea. I think that was originally
For a
envisioned.
number of reasons.
it was a public agency that sponsored the conference summit on climate and resiliency. And because of all of the reasons you so eloquently stated, that's why we did the registration fee. That's why we did corporate sponsorships for it. And so,
So I guess the question now is, will we do that for this particular event that we're
that's
discussing
up
right
to
now?
all of you, whatever is your pleasure.
I think we almost have to.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to just come out and say that.
No,
I
think
mean,
we have to.
but I think the reality of it is we do need to consider it being a revenue opportunity and definitely do not smother TBARTA with more expenses. We definitely need to avoid that.
Yeah,
Sponsorships and registration fees.
Yes, sir.
yeah.
And we have two opportunities to bring us
Absolutely.
revenue.
So Commissioner Long,
Yeah.
can you give us a summation of the resiliency conference? How much was the fee, registration fee? How much were the sponsorships you gathered, the budget?
Yes, I can put that all together for you and for our next meeting if you would like. Our executive director for the Regional Planning Council is extremely conservative, and he was, as is that board, a lot of the folks that sit on that board, and they were very hesitant to support it because they thought it would cost so much money. So they set up a budget for us of $10,000 to do it. And as we started to work on it, and with all the stakeholders involved, we realized that we were gonna, you know, it was gonna cost a lot more than that to put it on. And we started in January, and we had, no, when did we start, Doyle? Yeah. It was a full year. It took us a full year. We put it on, and we had a registration fee. It wasn't exorbitant. I want to say it was $390. Yeah, between 200 and 300, depending on. Yeah, it was tiered. There was a tiered registration fee depending on the activities that you wanted to participate in. So, yeah.
But it did end up breaking even or making money.
It actually made money. I mean, we got in sponsorship dollars and registration more than we had to pay the hotel and more than we ever thought we'd be able to raise. So we were very, very pleased. That said, there's a difference between doing it at the Carillon Hilton and doing it at the Tampa Marriott Waterside, and so we're taking that into consideration as well. And again, we haven't worked up any details because I wasn't really sure how this conversation was gonna go. And we were we intentionally did not reach out to every stakeholder that's listed here, just because I didn't know if all of you were gonna have input and think that a lot of this outline was kinda no good, or you wanted to change it, or whatever. I was trying to be respectful of all your wishes. Yes, Mr. Secretary.
Just two things. One, so the registration fees, I don't know, I think I had seen, we're looking at maybe a 2-day type event. I don't know if it's possible or whether it would work to have one day that maybe doesn't require registration and another day that would, because if you charge a registration fee, you're gonna get consultants and people in the industry and people who are looking at networking opportunities, not so much people who are maybe not involved in it from a business standpoint, but are interested in transit and could be, you know, proponents for it in the community, or if there's a way to provide certain people with a free registration, I don't know, but that's one thing. The other thing, you know, because in TBARTA's charge, you know, we've struggled over time with the regional aspect of it. You know, we have PSTA, we have HART, we have, you know, Pasco County Transit, and we're trying to tie things together into a regional framework. If we could find some other regions that have successfully overcome that challenge, that we would want to come in and talk about, because I think a lot of people don't understand, one, the fund, how do you get transit funded? And then if you want to do it more than just on a county by county or a, what have other people done? I know in Orlando, they've done stuff to get Sunrail up and running. I know there's other regions around the country that have developed regional systems that didn't just happen because, you know, just thinking the regional aspect of it, if we could show some success stories that maybe could get people to start thinking a little more, especially, you know, some agencies are a little more regional thinking than others. But
That's a
I
great
think that's a
idea.
great idea. Bill Ball from Tyndale Oliver and I will actually be in Atlanta next week speaking to the folks from the ATL, which is one of the peer regional transit authorities that we studied during the regional transit development plan. And we can talk to them, and if it looks like they would be a good fit for coming and speaking at the summit, I can mention it to them if nobody has any objections with that.
So I like the 2 day, but let's plan it accordingly. We can control the agenda. And for the consultants and the ones that want to attend for whatever their various reasons, we can, you know, turn the agenda to give them what they want and get what we want and get their registration fees. We control the agenda while we do everything. So let's strategically look at it so we can put ourselves as well as the individuals that's coming in a win-win situation.
Thoughts, Brad? You haven't spoken up.
Well, I know there's lots of folks that I've seen at conferences like we're just talking about, so they're all kind of running together to me. But it's an interesting thought about whether we would get citizens to attend if we didn't charge a fee or anything like that. And I don't know. I don't think I've been to a transportation conference in the Tampa Bay region, and I've probably been to over 100, that I've seen a citizen. And, you know, I think it's pretty hard to get a lot of citizen interest regardless of the cost. But I was very inspired at the resiliency conference because that did have a fee, and maybe because I was an outsider, I was a transportation person at a sustainability conference, there were lots of citizens. There were, I wouldn't say they were just random citizens off the street, but there were people that were interested that weren't necessarily in the, directly in the field. But then the majority of the attendees were city officials or county officials or, you know, experts in some kind of field, consultants and things like that. And I think it would be a success even with a fee. You know, we can certainly fill the room with, I don't remember what the fee was for the resiliency conference, but
So
something in that nature.
to the point that he's speaking to and the secretary spoke to, that's why we had various levels of the registration fee. If you were an industry person, it was one thing. If you were a consultant, it was something else. If you were an, you know, ordinary citizen, it was a different fee. So it was structured so that we tried hard not to eliminate anyone, but we also recognized that we had expenses. For example, we had a continental breakfast that first morning. We didn't, you know, ask anybody, are you with the industry or are you a citizen?
You didn't grill them?
We didn't grill them, we just, you know, let everybody in. So stuff like that you're gonna encounter.
I mean, you mentioned that it takes a long time to pull these types of technologies together if they were gonna be there as presenters. What does that mean in timeframes?
So, when we invite those technology companies to bring their equipment to the conference for demonstration, you know, there's a lot of logistics they need to work out, because today the equipment could be in Paris doing a demonstration, and you're talking about bringing it in, you know, in August. They have to work out their logistic. If they're doing a 6-month pilot, they say, well, we can't bring it. Or if they're building something, say, you know, in San Francisco, they're starting to testing out delivery, you know, with a unmanned vehicle. You know, can you ask them to bring something to your conference to do a demonstration? They have to work out their logistics. So what we encounter during those organization processes, many of them just say no, because what's in it for us? You know, we were just really having some difficult time. You know, luckily, for our first conference, we were able to link up with the local dealerships for cars. So they brought in Tesla, they brought in Cadillac, you know, with some of those automated features. So that kind of make it interesting, you know, those demonstrations. But it was pulling teeth, I can tell you. It took a lot,
So,
many phone calls.
thank you, Mingo. So out of respect for everyone's time, and because we promised that these these workshops or steering committees or stakeholders groups would not last more than 45 minutes to an hour. We've gotten a lot of content that you've given us in terms of input. How about we come back, when is our next meeting, Jennifer?
Next month.
At what date?
March 20th.
March 21? How about if we come back at our next workshop meeting, right after the board, and we have an updated sheet that gives you what we've learned over this month. We'll talk Mingo and get some ideas on time frame and all of that, because we have tentatively asked the Marriott to hold those dates, and my concern is if we release them, then it's a crapshoot, because now we go into tourist season, and so I'm just saying, you might think that's not so easy, but it's not easy to tie down a facility.
Especially that one.
For some, yeah, but yeah.
I just have one more thought. I don't want to keep it until our next meeting. So I thought it was a great idea doing the 2018 summit that we brought in some ordinary citizens, talk about their travel experience.
Yes.
You know, within the region. I thought that was a great discussion, and you know, folks pay attention to that, and people listening to that are ready to take action to solve their problem, because listening to those folks, you know, how difficult it is to take transit, you know, from New Tampa to the airport. You know, he was just appalled, like why it takes 2 hours, 3 hours. So I think that would be a good session.
It's a good program for a panel, and we can all talk about how long it takes to get from here over to Tampa, or Tampa over to here.
Can I make a recommendation, though, if you're going to do that? It might be also nice to bring in some folks who have other experiences outside this community that were positive. If Atlanta's working, maybe somebody recently I don't know how we find those, but maybe somebody recently just moved from Atlanta that enjoyed the Atlanta transportation and how it worked. And so you have how it is here, how it is there, and maybe in an area that has done regional transportation or has experienced some of these other forms of transportation that we're talking about in order, you know, kind of yin and yang, if you will, kind of a balancing. So.
Yeah. So how does that sound to everybody, that we come back at the end of our meeting next month with some additional information and data and ideas for programming? In the meantime, would it be all right with you if we sent this, I mean, do you have anything to say about the outline, other than the budget number in there? We can come back with a little bit better fine-tuned budget than that. Don't worry,
Well, in the
Commissioner
meantime, it would
Seal.
be interesting if you could send us the resiliency budget.
Yes.
With a good breakdown, so we have a little bit of a clue how that all worked.
Yeah.
And the registration fees and.
Commissioner, if I
Yeah.
may, I kind of made notes on what I heard consistently from this group here is, so we're talking about current practices and current status of our system, transit system, right? And then where should we go, which brings in the best practices around the nation? And then how can technology help us there, and talk about different technologies that are out there, right? You know, those are kind of like the three themes that I heard, so. I don't know, if that is something that we could incorporate into your notes, Commissioner.
Okay. Yes.
I've got to adjourn the TBARTA meeting officially, and I would direct staff to next time notice this as a workshop, totally separately to comply with Florida Administrative Code. So any further business for TBARTA? None being heard, I will accept the motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, that was great.
How's it going?
It was a good start. Commissioner Long.
Great start. Just say, I work on that laptop, I guess.
We'll both have one side by side.
Whenever, wherever there.
Yes.